So Tom, what are we talking about today? Because my chat keeps asking me, and I'm like, I don't really know what we're talking about
Tom,
today.
I'm a bit annoyed with you, mate, because you were going on about doing this fucking conversation, and you keep saying, "What do you want to talk about? What do you want us to talk about?"
Hold on.
Chad and I have no beef at all.
That's perfectly fine.
Chad and I was like, hey, just I'm good, and he was like, yeah, and I was like, okay.
Okay, just to be clear, okay, so I'm in his chat just watching, right? He says, so one of his chatters is like, hey, you and NotSoErudite should talk again. And he's like, oh yeah, I'd love to talk to her again. And I was like, if you guys do, I would love to moderate if you want a moderator. And he's like, oh, hell yeah, dude, that's awesome. So then you jump in and he says, hey, Erudite, Tom's wants the two of us to talk, so he's going to go set that up. And I was like, oh, wait, I didn't suggest this. So then I asked him, I was like, so are we talking about Dr. K? And he's like, yeah, that's good. And we talked about like topics, and we went over a couple of things. And then I was asking for more if either one of you were looking for something specific. I know that since y'all's last conversation, I watched him and Mr. Girl both have a conversation about you for a while, where they were talking about the fact that it seemed as though like one of the things that you kept saying you felt like you were being misrepresented on was like, or some of the things that you believed. I'm sorry, I have it in my notes.
I was being misrepresented on?
Yes. You had said a number of times that you had felt like you were, like there were misconceptions on what it was that you actually believed when it came to Dr. K, and that you felt like people kept saying that you were defending him when you didn't feel like you were defending him. But that was like something that came up over and over in the conversation, was your defense of Dr. K. And I think even like I've had people in my comments mention before, like, oh, that's the girl who loves Dr. K and just won't stop defending him. So I figured if you wanted to address that first, and maybe we can see where it goes from there.
Sure. So I'm not on Dr. K's retainer. I had never heard of Dr. K until Max suggested that we talk about Dr. K. I still to this day don't watch his content. I don't have overly strong feelings in either direction about Dr. K. I think there are some things to criticize very validly, and then I think there are invalid criticisms. And I've mostly pushed back against the invalid criticisms, and it seems like nobody wants to talk about what I would view as more of the valid criticisms.
And do you... Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Chud. Actually, go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, the thing that brought it to my mind is I think you'd said something and I said, like, well, it really doesn't make sense to me to introduce, additional perverse incentives to a conversation like this, like, subs popping off and stuff like that. And someone in my chat said, well, NotSoErudite would agree with that. And I was like, okay, well, if she agrees with that, then that's fine. So I guess there's probably some things which I think are bad. And if you're like, oh, yeah, I agree, we kind of agree,
Adverse, do you want to explain that? Sorry, I feel like I'm getting the short version of what that argument is. Adverse, so are you talking about basically the fact that he's having these conversations and there's money coming in?
Yes, exactly. Okay. To an audience, because obviously, we live in a society. So therapy is going to be something you have to, give money for. And that would obviously normally be the patient giving the therapist some cash, and they, that's a transaction, a very simple transaction that then exists. But right. If you're, having a conversation which is okay, how would you term the conversation?
So it, like, in all way looks like therapy. The issue is I don't know if at like a codified legal level, if it's literally therapy. Okay. That's all I'm talking about. Like, I think it looks like therapy, obviously, but the issue is that when you actually get into like the details of like what is therapy at like a codified level, which it has to be some practice of therapy for like most of the ethics to apply. And there are some ethics that go outside of like, well, this doesn't look like therapy, and so maybe we should still have ethics about that and like how you engage as a practitioner outside of therapy. But that's, to me, like the fundamental question is like, is his disclaimers enough? I would argue no, but I also think an ethics board might say yes. And I don't know how they wouldn't say yes based on like what I understand of the codified practice.
Okay. So just for shorthand, if I just say therapy, so, performing therapy, you've got a simple transaction normally. And I feel like when you start to add extra elements in, it just adds further complications, which just causes more issues that need to be dealt with. And in some cases, they're not only not beneficial to the client, they could potentially be detrimental. So, you add a live audience, and then you've kind of got the Hollywoodization of it almost, and people want to see like the breakthroughs. And so, you might be influencers push for like, moments where they break down because that to people looks good. But that's not necessarily what's best for the patient. And then, subs are popping off and, people are donating and giving money as these things happen. And I just think it creates more and more pressure on what really should be stripped back and be, I would think, a more simple relationship and transaction.
Yeah, right. Like there's something that's really appealing about what Dr. K does, in that he like gets to these really like bare bones, deep human kind of connection conversations. And then I think he goes a little bit beyond that, which I would say is like probably just like where he's really unwise. So like giving them practical advice, giving them like like there's a help purpose to it of like how to improve certain things that they're coming with, right? Which is where I'm like, okay, well, that's where you're in really sketchy territory. Like probably shouldn't be doing that live. It's really, really gray. And there's this issue that I've kind of raised over and over, in that like I don't think our psych ethics are really well prepared for technology and stuff like this, because to be honest, when we wrote them, there wasn't people streaming like this. I don't think any of us ever thought about it.
Kyle, can I ask you a question? Do you think
Sure.
is the problem more so the license or the training?
Sorry, for which?
For Dr. K. So say he's not actually a licensed therapist. He doesn't practice therapy anymore. He doesn't do any of that stuff, but he still like has the training, and then he still goes live and kind of does the same exact thing. Would you still have the same issue?
So this is where all of this conversation comes down to, right? Is a lot of people are like, well, it's only bad because he's a licensed practitioner. And I'm like, that can't be the reason why it's a problem. If anything, that makes it better, because you would assume that they would be more mindful, more careful. Now, what Chud said about like the subs, this is the thing that I think is where it gets messy, is even if you have a licensed practitioner doing this, especially if their chat's open and subs are coming in, I don't know how you don't have these conversations influenced by the external things. That I think is like, it's a risk. Now, risk doesn't mean necessarily harm. But for example, when I watched his Yvonne conversation, I was pretty uncomfortable with it. Like I thought he was really pushing for stuff that he shouldn't have. And so it's like Dr. K might have started out with like the best intentions and doing this really well and like engaging with people in a really authentic way. But as it grows, what does it become? And I honestly like he's mostly stopped doing his therapy streams, I think, for the most part. So it's hard to say even what it's become now, because it's turned into the coaching thing, which is ethical. So, I mean, I think Max's argument is that it's only bad because he's a licensed practitioner. And my argument is that's really stupid. If it's bad because of the harm that it's doing, not just because he's a practitioner. Whether they were a non-practitioner or somebody who was practicing, if they were harming people publicly over and over, that should be the moral issue, in my view.
Yeah. What about you, Chud? Do you have the same issue?
I mean, yeah, like, the thing for me with it is, I think as long as there's an acceptance or agreement there, which seems to be that you're just piling on these extra kind of risks, as you say, obviously in and of itself, you can't say, well, this is definitely going to be an issue, because, obviously some of this is kind of newfound territory. But it's just frustrating, because it seems like with Dr. K in the past, what he's done is like, he's structured things not thinking about, he's presented it as, I'm doing what's best for like gamers and Twitch streamers, etc. But if you look at actually what he does, it seems like a lot of it is actually tailored towards more his own clout, more his own, financial gain. If you look at conversations he had, particularly early on, he had 50, 100 viewers. It was off the cuff conversations with big streamers and kind of just jumping, headfirst into it. And so there wasn't really like a considered approach, and it doesn't seem like he ever really took into account, from what I can see, all of these issues with like the subs, the live audience, and I mean, like you say, he has pulled back from that now. So that to me would seem to suggest that he's recognized that, hey, maybe some of this stuff isn't working, so we do need to pull back on some of the more, therapeutic kind of sessions that I'm doing. So,
sure.
Yeah.
But I'm more
I'd be curious.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask Chud, what is so I agree that there's something that gets messy with the subs and whatnot involved. And when things are messy, there's more potential for risk of harm. But it sounds like a lot of times, I could be misunderstanding you. When I hear you talk about it, it sounds like because there's these subs and messiness going on, the messiness in and of itself is the harm, which I don't really understand that connection.
I mean, in and of itself, it could be, totally fine. It doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a harm.
Right. Okay.
Sure. I just think that to me anyway, it seems to create a big risk that, you're not just doing a one-on-one session where the needs of your client are right at the front of your mind and that's what you're focused on. I mean, as a streamer, I know it's not just the person you're speaking to, it's the audience as well that you're considering too, particularly if you are trying to grow a business. So I don't think it's necessarily causing harm in and of itself. I think probably saying it's messy is a good way of looking at it, sure.
Okay, that's fair. I've heard some people say like it's the messiness itself that's harm, and I'm like, well, that's not really totally true, right? It's like the messiness is increasing the risk for potential harm. How do you feel about people, I guess, on your view, non-professionals having like deep emotional conversations on stream, especially let's assume best case scenario, right? Both parties are consenting and willing to talk about stuff, and they have a really deep conversation, maybe even gets emotional, and by the end, the one person who's kind of maybe more of the supporter in the conversation kind of talks to them and encourages them in some way to like how to self-improve. But neither one of them are professionals. They're just like two 19-year-olds or something like that. How do you feel about that?
I mean, generally, I don't think that would be a problem. I think the issue might come in though is if there's things being unpacked or things being talked about, which are traumatic. Like a live stream might not be the best place, to unpack that stuff necessarily. So I mean, it depends how deep we're talking. I think getting into like suicide attempts and stuff like that. I just don't think with the culture of Twitch and Twitch chat and the way that it goes, and the kind of people that watch Twitch, probably just isn't generally a good idea. And I would imagine that certain types of pressure, certain types of viewers, would only add pressure on people in that situation that isn't going to really be beneficial to them getting better. So yeah. If it's an extreme situation, it probably isn't good. But more minor things, a little bit, I'm a bit depressed, I'm a bit down, or stuff like that. That's probably fine, I guess. Yeah.
So why do you think people find Dr. K's videos like I've heard people talk about how it's like super cathartic, it's like actually super healing, and like help them get out of their depression. Like why do people find the Dr. K videos so helpful? As a viewer. Yeah.
I think that some of his spiritual stuff is probably going to be appealing to people. I mean, as someone that isn't particularly spiritual myself, I don't really see it. But yeah, sure. If you're like a spiritual person, or you're kind of more, you look at Eastern philosophy and stuff like that, I'm sure his Ayurvedic kind of ideas are probably going to resonate with you because that's kind of in that ballpark. Not that he really does that anymore, I don't think. And yeah, I guess if you are feeling down, listening to someone else talk about depression or any mental illness, you're probably going to that's probably going to resonate with you because it's going to feel like they're talking about like your experience, even though they're not. You're probably going to relate in a lot of ways. I know when I've heard people talk about their mental illness like depression because I've suffered with it before, I resonate with it because I'm like, I get this, I've been there, I understand where you are with it. So yeah, I think those are probably the two main reasons, I guess.
Yeah, that's fair. When it comes to therapy and stuff, just so I have an understanding, it sounds like you've been to therapy before. And when you're talking about the Dr. K stuff, you're like, what is the pseudotherapy? What is this? A lot of people looked at Dr. K stuff and say, like, it looks just like therapy, which to some extent I agree, depending on the model of therapy. Are you comfortable just letting me know, like, your exposure to therapy? Because it sounds like you're relating to what Dr. K is saying is like, that looks like therapy. I'm just trying to understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a long time ago now, but yeah, I had like what is it, like CBT kind of type that kind of stuff.
Okay, like with the homework and stuff. So would they give you like pamphlets that you had to like write your thoughts down on?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I never really liked it personally.
That's fair.
I always thought it was a bit cringe, but I think some of the stuff did help long term. But yeah, I'm quite a closed book even to therapists. So I don't know, it's a bit tough for me sometimes, but.
Yeah, no worries. I was just trying to get an understanding of like what you know to be therapy, because depending on probably your exposure to therapy, Dr. K's like streams are going to look more or less like therapy, right? Like if I talk to people who get DBT, they're like, this looks nothing like therapy. This just looks like a deep conversation. Whereas if I talk to somebody who gets more like generalized therapy, or like something where somebody would maybe call it like holistic therapy or like broad CBT, it might look a lot more like Dr. K. And so that's a really interesting piece. Like what he's doing looks nothing like EMDR. But it does look a lot like something called like emotional rational behavior therapy. Like it looks actually almost identical to that. Which is really interesting because like what is therapy is actually a really big question in the field itself, because there's so many different models of therapy, and some are really strict and rigid and they look a very certain way, and then others are a lot more conversational. And it's interesting because they all have similar efficacy as well.
But the other thing I think about it too, because we, obviously a lot of the conversation is focused around whether it's therapy or not.
Yeah.
But I think also though, like just watching it, there's things that like would make me feel very uncomfortable that don't seem to kind of like be a very good idea. Maybe you can shed some light on this. But for example, in Dr. K's first conversation with Reckful, he kind of, gets to the point where Reckful is like breaking down. He's very upset. Dr. K has made no attempt to find out anything about this guy. This is all happening live without any sort of due diligence. And it just seems to me that, to push someone to that level on a first conversation when you're doing this new live stream service and all this kind of stuff, it just seems like a very dangerous and, reckless way of going about it, So I just wonder if sometimes we focus on whether it's therapy or not, but it's like, what's the meat and potatoes of what's happening? And does it look right? Does it feel right? And I think that because we focus so much on, is this actually an ethical breach at the official level? It's like, well, look, let's just take it back to a human level. Right. Is bringing someone on for content and pushing them to the point of being in tears good for anyone to do? Like, I don't think it is.
So that's really interesting. What do you think is the harm in being in tears and like being really emotionally upset and exposed in a public domain? Just so I understand. And I'm not denigrating. I'm genuinely trying to understand, because you're basically asking a question like, is this safe? Is there harm? So like, what is the harm that you see?
Well, I don't even think it's necessarily a case of like, I'm trying to point out harm. It's like, that makes me feel very uncomfortable, and it doesn't seem right to me, because if someone is having like a moment with someone in a public place and they're breaking down, they're in a emotional conversation, that's one thing. But we're talking about like a monetized live stream. Dr. K has brought this person on because he's a bigger streamer. It seems like the motives are wrong, and it feels wrong. It feels like fucked up to me, and in terms of harm, I mean, in that moment, obviously, we weren't to know what was going to go on from there. I don't know if I could point you to like, oh, look, there's the harm being caused, because I'm not there. I don't know. I'm looking at this through a computer screen. But I know that certainly, particularly if someone does have like these mental health issues, as he stated, like surely fucking around with someone's emotions like that, it's almost like, trying to disarm a bomb, and you're kind of going in blind and just going balls to the wall, cut this wire, cut that wire, see what happens. Rather than taking a more considered approach. So even if there's no direct harm, I think it's a level of recklessness that doesn't really make sense and doesn't really seem to benefit the person that's being spoken to.
Okay. That helps me understand actually a lot more. As now it's been like months, I've had time to like think obviously about all this more. I've noticed that there's this interesting thing around emotions that I've even noticed in my own Discord. For example, if somebody comes in my Discord, typically when I'm not in there, and they start talking about their feelings, people start to get like kind of nervous, and they feel like this need to kind of like come around this person because they're having like lots of big negative emotions. And I realized that probably due to my field, I've even forgotten the experience of like, I'm exposed to really big, really negative, really intense emotions all the time from people, to the point that like I actually recognize that like most of like what goes up must come down. Like most emotions that get really big also come down, and that really big negative emotions aren't as scary as we kind of sometimes originally feel when we're not like exposed to them a lot. And so when I watch the Reckful thing, and he, part of the question is he choreographing to like cause this person to be more emotional, or is he having like a deep emotional connection Reckful in this case is really feeling seen, and so he cries and he becomes emotional as a response of that connection that he's feeling from Dr. K. Because those are
he was talking about he was talking about a suicide attempt and stuff as well. You know, it wasn't just that he started crying. You know, there was a lot of kind of deep stuff that clearly is deep rooted within Reckful. That wasn't just, oh, you know, he was crying because he was upset and felt a connection. Clearly he was having, to me anyway, you know, some level of you know, emotional trauma or something. I don't know how you'd put it, you know. So I don't know if it was just like showing emotion. It seemed like he was like, you know, in a bad way. And as someone that suffered depression before, you know, I kind of look at it and you know, maybe I'm inserting my own personal experience in, but I think, fuck me, like this seems like he's, you know, prodded this person to the sense of breaking down. And for what? Like, what benefit is there to this, except for Dr. K's viewership and bank balance? Like, it doesn't seem like there is really, you know, a significant benefit beyond, oh, hey, look, I've managed to get this breakthrough on stream. The subs are coming in, the donors are coming in. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So maybe I could give like an example of like, obviously it's not a stream, but there was, I did a lot of teaching at the women's shelter that I worked at. I also had individual counseling with these clients. And a lot of times in class, stuff would come up and I was really willing to just like let people go kind of where their emotions took them to some extent. And so there was oftentimes conversations that were really intense, really heavy about trauma, about sexual abuse, stuff that came up. And there is a certain protectionism that I think has to happen. For example, I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of Dr. K bringing on people who are not streamers and have no public experience or public exposure that they're used to, and then getting into their deep stuff because it's very different. Whereas somebody like Byron, to be honest, all of this stuff was already very public. So the biggest risk that I see is somebody coming on who doesn't understand the weird experience that it is to be really, really like internet public about your experiences. But even when we're talking about like suicide and stuff, I think there's a benefit to talking about this stuff because I think it's really deeply human and real. The reality is like people do think about suicide and it is messy and unpretty and it looks ugly and it feels hopeless. And there's like a reality to that. And it seems like, to me at least, our society hasn't been benefited by putting this stuff even more in the closet and even more behind closed doors. I think it's just that if we open the door, there are certain risks that I don't think Dr. K took fully into like mind that you have to protect individuals against. That I think you like. My biggest criticism is Dr. K needs to do more, just more protectionism overall. But I don't have a problem if people want to talk about their suicide on stream. I personally wouldn't do it at this point because of how. Like I actually don't like doing individual counseling and stuff like the big heavy one-to-one stuff overall. That's why I left my old workplace. I don't love individual counseling in general. And it's just not what I came onto the platform to do, to be honest, is like have like big emotional conversations about like people's suicide and stuff. But I think that there's a real value to like talking about this, right? When he's crying about his suicide, I think like there's probably is some trauma there and there's probably a lot of grief. There's probably a mixture of grief too. First of all, it's so sad that he wants to die. That's horrible. Right? There's a lot of grief of just knowing like I hate my life so much that I don't even want to be here. But then there's like a secondary grief of, and I fucked up. I didn't even succeed. Like fuck. There's this weird tension people have with their suicide in that like they didn't actually succeed. And then there's also this like final level of just like trauma of like what the actual experience is like, right? Where people find you maybe end up in the hospital, you maybe end up formed like involuntarily committed, for a while. And so there's like this complex nature. And I wonder how much we're benefiting society by keeping it fully behind closed doors and how we can safely talk about it in a way. And I don't have the perfect answer. And I don't think Dr. K is doing it perfectly. I just think like emotions, even really big, scary, huge emotions like suicidality, I think we have to talk about them. I think we just need to talk about them in a safe way.
Well, I guess the question I'd ask, so, you know, let's say you were at the shelter, that you were going in to see someone, you'd never spoke to them before, you had no idea what their situation was, nothing like that. Would you feel comfortable putting that on broadcast to thousands of people and letting the people watching give you money?
No, I've already said no, but I don't want to do what Dr. K does. And so I think there's criticisms to be made. For example, are people aware of how publicity works in their life?
Yeah, sure. But that's my point, is you recognizing that that's like a bad thing to do, which is great. I mean, that's the whole point of, this conversation, is
It's
it seems like
risky.
there's been a misunderstanding. Yeah, it's very risky.
It's risky. It's not inherently bad, but the risks aren't worth it, and I'm not interested enough to do it. And I'm not convinced that, like, yeah, to be honest, like, selfishly, I just don't want the risk. I'm not interested in it.
Okay, but so you wouldn't do it yourself because you think it's too risky. But it seems like also you're thinking Dr. K shouldn't have done it, so it's too risky. So it was like a bad decision, right?
No, I don't know if Dr. K shouldn't have done it. I think he should have had better safeguards in mind.
But he shouldn't have done it as he did it, basically.
In some conversations that I've seen. Some conversations I've seen are in my view,
like the first Reckful conversation, should he have done it in the way that he did it?
I think the first one was fine. I think the fact that he followed up 5 times publicly was a really big issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I guess the issue is I don't want to get stuck in the weeds too much, but it seems like you're saying on the one hand you wouldn't go and broadcast that because it's like a risk on you, and it's a risky thing to do. But you're happy for, you're somewhat happy for Dr. K to have done it in the way that he did, even though you're saying it's very risky to do it that way.
What are the safeguards that you're looking for?
Sure. I guess I'll answer both of these. So it might be helpful maybe if I outline a bit of like how my moral framework works, because oftentimes there's things that I will prescribe for myself that I don't necessarily put on other people. So I kind of view morality as like best practice, tolerable, and intolerable. And so like I don't think what Dr. K did a lot of the time was at best practice. And so I wouldn't engage in it. I try to be at best practice as often as I can from my view, but I'm not comfortable throwing the book at people that are at tolerable. Also because I realize I, like, essentially as a virtue ethicist to some extent, I realize that my view of best practice could be wrong. And so that's probably part of this like weird duality of like, so you're okay with others to do it, but not yourself. And it's like, yes, but I have a lot of moral prescriptions where I'm like, I don't do this because I don't think it's probably the best decision, but I don't know if I can objectively say that it's immoral for others to do it. I don't know if it's obviously intolerable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that doctors should ever engage in risky behavior in their profession?
I think if they're putting the client first and trying to help people, sometimes, yeah.
Okay. Do you think that Dr. K was putting Reckful first in what he did the first time round?
Yes.
Okay. I guess there's a fundamental disagreement there because I just don't understand how off the cuff bringing someone in that you don't know anything about and going into an in-depth conversation with them in front of a live audience when you're getting all these subs and stuff. I don't understand how that's putting him first, because to me it seems like he's primarily concerned with his audience, his viewership. I want to get some clout out of this. I want to get this person on. I don't understand how he's putting him first. So to me, I would think, well, that risk doesn't really seem to be in the benefit of the patient. It seems to be for the benefit of himself.
Right. So I'm not sure.
I don't think it does, because I feel like you're saying, well, that's risky and I wouldn't do it, but he did it and that's up to him. That's what it feels like you're saying. But it seems like, you're almost not willing to say, well, yeah, I think that was a bad thing or a mistake that he made. And you're just sort of going, oh, it was risky. I wouldn't do it, but if someone else did, so be it. And then you say, well, as long as it's in the patient's interest that risk is taken. And I don't really think there's much evidence. Like on what basis would you say that Reckful's needs were being put at the forefront in that conversation?
So how do you think it would have felt for Reckful when they start this conversation, right? I think there was a moment where I would agree he probably could have done a little bit more research into Reckful, and he was probably just really excited to talk to Reckful and was probably a little bit like jumped the gun a bit.
I mean, he didn't do any. You just started talking to him immediately without any sort of consideration of what this guy was about.
Right. So he said like, hey, how's it going? And what do you want to talk about? That's just what do you want to talk about? Right. In a really like open way. And I think like if you were a beginning streamer, you might not really be expecting Reckful's next line, which is, well, I've had depression for my entire life. I'm diagnosed with type 2 bipolar, and my brother died by suicide when I was 6. That was basically Reckful's next line. And Dr. K went, so now you have two choices as the individual. You force this offline because you just unveiled all this really spicy stuff. But there's this real reality that we have to deal with. We deal with this in group therapy a lot too, for example, where when somebody opens up with really big stuff like that, there's a reason. For example, like if you have a client and then they sit there and they're like, yeah, I cut myself every single day. And they say it really pointed right in your face and they look right directly at you. They're looking for something. And so if in that situation, I would be really sorry, there's a super loud truck. You're caught in this weird place because if you force them to go offline and talk about it in private, it communicates something to Byron, which is that you're too much for the public space. You're too much. That's what it communicates. And this is a really big issue, for example, that we deal with in group therapy a lot of the time, which is to what extent do you allow people to go into stuff and to what extent do you protect the group? And because you know that if you tell them, we have to do this elsewhere, you inherently communicate you are too much, which can be really, really damaging for somebody, particularly as we later find out, like Byron, who has been too much for basically everyone in his life forever. And that's like one of his biggest struggles is people walking away because he's too much emotionally. And so that's why I think like, that's why he leaned into like staying public, because he was like, I think he was like, okay, you're bipolar. Let's see where this goes. And then as we got more and more into the layers of trauma, you're doing this weird dice of, I want to protect the public. I don't want to be too intense. I want to protect them from sharing things that they maybe otherwise wouldn't want to. And I don't want to tell them that they're too much, because that can be like really, really, really damaging, especially as we also know with Reckful, he had very, very, very negative experiences with psychologists and psychotherapists in the past. And he was basically over all of them. Like he was like, once we find out some of the behind the scenes, like he was finally willing to talk to Dr. K, but like that was all he was willing to do as far as like mental health work, like in any way.
I think because the thing is, when you give an example, you're like, right, well, there's this situation that happened here. Obviously, it's the nature of it, but you're always kind of referencing a closed door like situation. So the dynamics of that are going to be very different. We're talking about, he's got this guy on a live stream. I think, a few thousand people are watching. So I think that completely changes the dynamic. I guess the question I ask is, when Dr. K heard that and continued to talk with him, what do you think Dr. K's kind of main goals were? What was at the front of his mind when he was talking to him initially and he heard that he had, these mental health issues?
I think he really, so I could be wrong. This could be me just kind of putting like what I try to do when I like talk with anyone that I see is like in need is there's a couple of things that I think people really need in life is to be seen and and for people to be okay with what they see. And so a large part of a conversation is just trying to see people, like getting past the mask and actually just seeing them. And then once you see them, people are really messy and ugly. There's going to be parts of them that are not nice, which is when the client comes out and says, yeah, I self-harm all the time. They're saying, see me, but I know you're going to reject me, right? So I think what he read into Byron was potentially correct, could be incorrect, right? Of basically, I'm being seen. I'm going to force you to see me. And I know I'm going to be too much to you. And so I think him choosing to basically follow Byron into like his intense like size of emotion and everything was a choice to basically say like, I do see you and I'm okay and comfortable with what I see. I don't see a lot of like intentional narrative driving from Dr. K in the Byron conversations, though to be clear, I do see it in other conversations later in his career that I do have a problem with, where it seems like he's like pushing people for certain responses. And that's a problem. But with Byron, I don't see as much of that.
Okay. Do you think that at any point when Dr. K got someone who did have a particularly difficult mental health history, do you think that he perhaps had any sensation of like a fisherman that's caught a big fish? Like, oh, this is a good one that I can get into and is, going to be something I can really get my teeth into and it's going to help me grow and people are going to be interested. It's like, do you think the kind of satisfaction at getting like a juicy case had any impact on his decision making, or do you think he purely was, looking at it as a doctor and doing the right thing from a doctor's perspective?
You're basically asking me to speculate about like his like thoughts and intentions behind it, and I can't really say. I think if we give him the benefit of the doubt, he wouldn't be. But if he's the worst actor, then he would be thinking like a caught.
But you're already doing that because you're saying that Dr. K is taking the client's best interest into account and taking risks with, to take his best interest into account. So you're already speculating on what he's doing already. But it's only when I'm asking you to speculate on something which makes him look negative that you seem to take issue with it.
It feels like these are different types of speculations. The first speculation is like to some level, like more or less like a therapeutic orientation, like what he's doing with the individual. And now this one is basically, is he like creating a show? Does he have like these negative manipulative intentions? So do I think that he thought like he caught a big fish? No, I could be wrong though. And I even said with all of the theoretical speculations about his therapy, I could be wrong. Like I realize that I could be wrong, but this is just like what I see.
It just, it feels like you're willing to kind of speculate on what he's doing if it gives a positive impression. But if I'm saying, do you think he did something which was kind of bad?
Yeah, he might have done something bad. If it turns out that he like is basically thinking like he caught a big fish, like that's really bad. That's like the worst possible instance. So yeah, I am giving him the benefit of the doubt when I like read into these things. But in fairness, that tends to just be how I operate. Like I don't think that should be shocking coming from me. I give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Like the fact that like I've talked with Max this many times and I'm still giving him the benefit of the doubt. And like, I still say things like, I think he's genuinely a good person and trying. I don't think people should be shocked that I'm giving Dr. K the benefit of the doubt. That tends to be my style and modus operandi.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I just don't, I find it difficult to see how the risks that were being taken, as in speaking to him without doing any due diligence or speaking to him offline to find out what's going on, going further down pathways of trauma without, taking a step back and seeing like, hey, maybe this isn't, maybe this isn't something we should do online. I don't know if that level of risk is kind of consummate to like a benefit that he would have been thinking of for Reckful. I guess I just don't really see it.
You do remember me saying that I don't think he should have had the follow-up. Like I think that those were wrong. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
Because just there's this narrative being built that like I just won't say anything negative about Dr. K and that like I'm just trying to defend it. And so like just be clear, I have criticisms, right?
Yeah,
and I'm willing to go those. I'm just not willing to give criticisms that I don't think apply.
So just to really clarify, you think obviously the follow-ups are bad, but you think that in that initial conversation, he did take risks, but the risks were putting Reckful at the center of the experience, so to speak. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I guess maybe. I mean, I don't know. I'd like to hear the criticisms, I guess, but it feels like we'd probably just agreed. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know, Tom, if you had something you wanted to take this, or
we can go into criticism if people like want to hear me criticize Dr. K, I guess.
I mean, one. Chud, do you even care about the intent? Because it sounds like she cares about the intent of like what it is that he's doing. Do you care about the intent, or do you only care about the outcomes of this?
I mean, yeah, obviously, I think if I think that negligence is better than maliciousness. Like, sure, but like. I don't want to make crazy analogies, but a negligent surgeon killing someone, is better morally than someone just doing the doctor fucking filling their lungs with heroin or whatever. But like if the outcome is the same, it's like, yeah, obviously legally we judge it less harshly, but the outcome is the outcome, So
okay. And yeah, Kyla, I did want to know what the safeguards were, because to me it sounded like if you had safeguards set up that you would expect of Dr. K, then you and Chud might agree on what the outcomes of those safeguards would be.
Potentially. I think like safeguards is, first of all, I think like at a codified level, we need to figure out what therapy is and what it isn't, especially like professionals are allowed to have deep, intimate conversations. This is an issue with therapy, right? A lot of therapy, especially general therapy, looks like two friends having a deep conversation. The difference between two friends and a therapist is that the therapist will never talk about themselves and never ideally inject themselves into it, like at a deep personal level, right? So that's the main difference, is that between two friends, you might have a deep conversation with your friends, but they kind of expect at some point that you'll give it back, right? There's kind of that tit for tat. Whereas with the therapist, it is just about you at all times. And then other forms of therapy obviously look very different than that. So that's one confusing part, is like, can therapists have really deep emotional conversations with friends? I think everyone who's rational would say yes. I think Chud would also say obviously yes, right? Otherwise, if you're a therapist and you're married, you're fucked. You're basically always doing therapy on your spouse, which would be ridiculous, right? And I don't think anyone would claim that. The issue is, okay, well, what about if you have a deep, intimate conversation with your friend 6 times in a row and it's all focused on them and it's never about you? And you're a practicing psychologist. Is that ethical now? And to be honest, I don't know. Like, I don't know. And I've taken a number of psych ethics courses and I've talked extensively with different psychologists about this. And like, dual relationships and like these blurry lines get really complicated when you're in a field that's helping oriented, but specifically helping towards like mental faculties and stuff, right? A doctor has a much easier time having a much less dual relationship if he like, it's pretty clear when he's giving you like prescriptions versus when he's like just like married to you. And so like this is a really big thing, is like actually figuring out what therapy is and isn't. So I think Dr. K tried to say it's not therapy by just having disclaimers. It's not therapy, right? And that was sufficient. And do you agree that this isn't therapy, right? Yes, 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 yes. Okay, well, what if it still looks, feels, acts, and sounds like therapy? Now is it therapy? Well, what if both parties agreed it wasn't therapy? Well, what if there's this exchange of exposure going on? Is that now therapy? Because there's kind of this, it's kind of like a bargain, and you're allowed to barter to do therapy. It's not typically recommended, but you're allowed to actually barter for therapy. So is that more of like a bartering relationship? And so like, the issue is that like so much of what Dr. K is doing exists in this space where there's like not really clear answers because the field just honestly hasn't thought about it.
Do you think there can be answers to that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Typically how we get these answers is a mixture of like thinking about it from a philosophical lens and then a lot of post hoc stuff. So like looking back at times where things went really wrong and correcting it, right? So like Dr. K might be an example where, for example, they go, well, there's a lot of things that were done wrong, and then they correct it. They might also go back and say, here are things that actually he did super right. And then we also include that. So getting really clear about what is therapy. And then also, can you publicize it? So like, I don't know much about the ethics behind Dr. Phil, but he's been running for like 30 years, and I don't know much of the tech. I think he's in Austin. So probably it'd be worth, if anyone's like really curious, looking into like the Texan ethics board, because they've probably had to wrestle through this already with Dr. Phil. I'd be really curious what they decide about this public form of like, I mean, if it is therapy, it's pretty shitty therapy, but like public form of like therapy-esque stuff. How they kind of quantify that. So like, what is therapy? And what is enough to make it not therapy would be the other question. So that would be one safeguard to get really clear. And then another one would be if you have somebody like Reckful, who seems to consistently not understand the line between therapy and not therapy, you have to stop either talking to them totally, which could do serious harm to them. But that would be like, to be honest, like one ethical thing that you could choose to do. You could try to recommend them out, obviously, but then what do you do if they won't go? Well, maybe you don't, it's not your problem anymore, right? So now we get really messy. So stop with people who can't seem to separate the two. And then I think he's done a couple of weird things, like he talked with somebody and now he's their therapist. Like I think like Pokimane, and that again is like really weird. It's not technically unethical, but it's definitely weird. And we should probably like clean up in general our ethics on dual relationships. Because right now what we're taught is dual relationships can be unethical and there's risk there, but they're not inherently unethical. And so like, basically it's like you're taught, I think the APA 7 just talks about like, the code of ethics talks about like, it's only a breach if it causes like a lack of objectivity. It puts the client at harm. Dual relationships are a breach of ethics when there's lack of objectivity, breach of like risk of harm, and then something else around like essentially benefiting the client and like being kind of messy because of that. So like you have to make sure that you're not like ruining and harming somebody by your dual relationship, and then it's ethical. But like most of that is going to be post hoc. Are you harming somebody? Well, we'll find out, 4 months from now, which is not probably the best code of ethics to have it as like post hoc.
Sorry, just a question on like dual relationships, because like in my mind, let's say there was like a therapist and a patient, and they were just having a therapy session, and then at the end, there's no reason for this at all. The therapist just turns around and says, "Hey, you know what? I get on with you pretty well. How about we go check out the football game later?" And the patient goes, "Yeah, okay." And they both buy their own tickets. They both go and watch the football game together. I mean, in my mind, that would just be a complete frivolous like element being added to that patient-therapist relationship. But would that maybe be acceptable under ethics guidelines, do you think?
Oh man. So again, typically when we're taught to be really conservative. So it's like, is there any purpose to it? Does it just seem, if it's just about you, probably don't do it. Right. So it's honestly hard to say. I would lean on the side of it's probably not ethical because it seems like about you. But what if they had talked like 2 sessions ago about how they had like fear about going out and stuff? So it's like, it's probably not a good idea. And it's undo relationships really are taught, try to be conservative. Might get a slap on the wrist for sure. It would really depend on like how all of that played out. It would depend a lot on what that client was like, whether they were like, if they had a childhood trauma, authority issues, maybe some like attachment patterns that are really unhealthy. Well, that would be worse than if they're a client who's maybe like more like independent and just experiencing like transitional stress and stuff like that. Yeah, so it's really messy. Maybe I'll offer you a question back of something that one of my peers had to try to wrestle through. I'm curious what you would think about this. So one of my friends was working with a client as an individual counselor, and that client didn't have a lot of family, and they were pregnant. So when they gave birth, they asked if their psychologist could be there because they had no other family. Do you think it would be unethical to go?
Your chat says Chud is muted. Kyla.
What?
My chat says Chud's muted?
Yeah. Am I?
No, he's not. I think he just got turned down by accident. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I mean, I'm just thinking based on what you've kind of outlined. I don't know if that would be like such a big deal. I mean, I would say, like, it's not like, what I mean by that is like, I don't think an ethics board is going to look at if that was to happen and like fire the doctor or some shit. But to me, it seems to be a mistake, in my mind anyway, to form any sort of relationship with a patient beyond the baseline relationship for sessions, organizing sessions and stuff like that. Because if you start developing anything beyond that, I wonder if it would maybe eventually start to cause a conflict of interest. So it might not even be that in itself is a bigger deal, but like, what might that lead to? It starts off that you go to their pregnancy and then they're like, oh, come on, you came to the pregnancy, come to the baby shower or whatever, and then it kind of, I don't have any family. Like, I don't have any family. You're the only person that can do this for me. And then does it get to a situation where that patient is reliant on this therapist and counselor to in their life? And does it get to a stage where they feel obligated to do it? So I just think maybe even if in itself it isn't a bad thing, like, would that maybe not lead to circumstances down the road which could be considered to be, bad, I guess, is the way I would look at it anyway.
So, sorry, to understand, the psychologist could go maybe to the birth, but probably shouldn't be too involved in the baby's life afterward?
I think it would be best to avoid the whole thing. If it was a desperate circumstance, maybe, but it seems to be an error of judgment. So I would say that no, they probably shouldn't do it. If they did do it as a one-off thing, I don't know if it would be the end of the world, but it's probably inadvisable.
Okay. So knowing though that if you don't do it, your client is now going to be completely alone while they give birth to their child because their family is super toxic and like won't show up if they're not like engaging in drug use with them.
I just don't think it's the therapist's problem. Like, the therapist is there to deal with what they're there to deal with in the time frame they're there. Yeah, it sucks that they don't have like a family, but what if they saw 5 clients and each of them has got a similar issue? Are they then expected to go to each of these clients' births because their family's not around, or some other family event? I just feel like it puts a lot of obligation and onus on the medical professional to do shit that they're not really being paid to do. And it would seem, to me anyway, to kind of complicate, the circumstance. But yeah,
okay. So in this circumstance, I talked about it a lot with the psychologist. She talked with multiple supervisors and the ethics of her. She was she had just gotten her license as a psychologist, so she was able to like go back to her supervisor and stuff. And they all said, yeah, you'd be totally fine to go.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is where we get into like the messiness of duels is, a lot of it. So say she went and then something really bad happened with the baby, say she was kind of in the way of the doctor and something happened, well, now that would have been a bad choice, but it's mostly a bad choice because of post hoc consequences that like she couldn't predict. So this is the problem I would argue as well with this codified thing of dual relationships, is we learn be as conservative as possible. But what if being as conservative as possible basically means that we like do some level of like either harm to our client, or we don't benefit our client, right? We like allow them to, because that was the thing. She's going to be alone, and it's going to really suck, like really, really suck. It would be really painful. And if she went, it would be like, she was like, I'm going to be as careful as possible. They put a sheet up so that she couldn't see her client's like genitalia or anything. And she stayed on the other side of the sheet. So she did her best to like protect her client as much as possible in that situation, but still went because the risk of this client basically being alone felt like big enough that they were willing to kind of allow some level of blurring. And so this is, I think, maybe what people outside of the field maybe don't realize is how often blurriness happens, and how a lot of times you have to like kind of feel it out. And there is a problem. I'll be fair. A lot of people in the field are really highly compassionate people, highly empathetic, and care about fifis a lot. And they may weigh more on the side of like caring about fifis than like practical safety than they maybe should. That's actually like a genuine criticism that I have of the field. And I think Dr. K is one of those people. He's a big fifis guy and does a lot of things that are like much more risky to try to help people that I'm like, I get it, but if it goes wrong, it can go wrong in a really big, bad way, which it did in this case.
Yeah, sure. Because, you know, if Dr. K did the pregnancy thing, you know, I don't know if that would, you know, I mean, you know, maybe Mr. Girl might take an issue with it. I don't know. But broadly speaking, I think that, you know, if that's approved, that's fine. But I guess the issue is I you know, it's difficult to think of anyone other than Reckful. There is actually another situation that I think would be interesting to get to. But this description in your thought process about dual relationships, if you were to apply your logic and thought process for that to Dr. K, would you say that the dual relationship was like appropriate or inappropriate with Dr.
With
K?
Reckful?
Yeah,
it became inappropriate because it was so unclear, for sure.
Okay, that's good.
Mm-hmm. That's why I say that the four after were where I would say becoming intolerable, right? I would view him at the benefit of the doubt. I don't think he was ever trying to like harm. There may be a bit of that complication of like clouding, but it's also possible that Reckful only wanted to be public as well. And so, but the fact that like session 2, conversation 4, he was still like, are you my therapist or are you my friend? I'm like, no, like this needs to be clear. Like this needs to be clear after the first conversation. It needs to be really clear. And like, if I ever ended up in that situation where I'm like, oh, somebody comes on and I'm chatting to them and then all of a sudden they're like, so anyways, Erudite, by the way, last week, you know, maybe probably not last week, but like, you know, 6 months ago, I attempted suicide. I would immediately be like, oh, fuck. Like, how do I navigate this in a way that I do the least harm to them? But also like, there's so many harms that are at risk here where like exposure publicly could be harmful, but also like shutting them down could be really harmful. And like, I don't want to make them, it's also harmful if like I shut them down and they take that bitterness out on like the field of psychology at whole. So it's just like, it'd be really complicated. But then after that conversation, I personally would make it really clear what my relationship is and be like, just so you know, in the future, like I can't really have these types of conversations on stream and stuff like that. Like this is, I'm always willing to give you resources, but like just is outside of my scope. So I would take that role. But I know in the field, a lot of people don't. And it's hard for me to say like they're just objectively always wrong, because I might be wrong. Maybe I'm too harsh. I don't know.
Okay. There's a question I've just thought of, which I think I guess has been a kind of the back of my mind. I feel like when we talk about like Dr. K and Mr. Girl, there's a lot of focus on like Mr. Girl said this and Mr. Girl said that. And look, Mr. Girl said a lot of stuff about Dr. K. But if you like look at his video, there are like people that deal with this exact issue of the ethics. I think I can't remember, one guy deals in a state, I think, or somewhere.
Oregon, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and his job is the ethics side of things, exactly the nature of what we're talking about. And he seemed to be you know, very critical of what Dr. K was doing. So I just, because, you know, you're referencing, oh, the person went and checked and they got this opinion, etc. How do you take on or interpret like the fact that you do have ethics people being so critical of Dr. K?
It's actually really interesting. I was talking about this with Elder Drazi. So I've talked with a lot of professionals in my life as well, and I've just explained the situation. I've only showed his video. I've sent his video to 3 different professionals, and they didn't really want to like watch it or anything or participate, except for one got back to me. But I also have just talked with multiple people in my life that are like psychologists and whatnot. One of them, by the way, is part of the college of our province for license and registering, and just kind of ask them about it. And it's really interesting. It seems like there's probably this issue in that when I'm telling it, I'm going to be the most charitable towards Dr. K. And most of their takeaways was being like, oh yeah, that is messy. It's really sad. Dr. K probably did wrong in a couple of areas. But also like this probably isn't necessarily wrong. Like it'd be really hard to say that this is obviously wrong. But then when Mr. Girl or Elder Drazi specifically has talked to different professionals, they've been like, this is horrific. It's terrible, which probably shows that like all of us are only going to be getting part of the story because it's like 20 hours worth of content in large part. And we're also going to have a lot of feelings about it. So we're going to imbue like our bias into like how we tell it, which is why from the very beginning I said, this should just be sent to the ethics board because they're going to have the full story and they can make the decision. But it's very interesting. I've like one of my supervisors, he's the college, he registered psychologist. He's very ingrained in ethics. He was like, oh yeah, not all of it's unethical. I don't think all of it's bad. Here are some things that went bad, but like doesn't really agree with a lot of the stuff that people in this video talk about, which is, that's real. Like, I think a lot of people are like, well, there's no professional who disagree with this. And I'm like, it's probably not true. Even if they had all access to it, even on the ethics board, they'll probably have people who are like, this is really bad and this is really good. Because some people take a very conservative approach to ethics and some people take a much like less conservative approach because a lot of people, to explain why people would be as conservative, they realize that being overly conservative often puts rules over people. And then you actually do harm to people and more people fall through the cracks because we're so hell-bent about like rules and like legality and stuff like that. So yeah, I think you would find professionals. I personally have found them. I'm not really interested in like making a counter narrative, like documentary on the situation. But I have talked to, which I suppose I could be lying about all that. So you can choose to believe that or not.
I don't think you're lying. Maybe the people that think you're a demon might think you're lying though.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, the other example I wanted to get to move away from like Reckful. I can't remember the precise details of this. Some of this was like a long time ago, but there was a woman that he was speaking to, Dr. K, and she talked about, I think, sexual assault or rape or something like that. And it seemed like Dr. K was pushing her pretty hard to like give more
Yvonne.
Details.
That was Yvonne. That's the one I was referring to. Yeah.
Yeah. So I presumably you would be critical of that interaction. I would assume based on what you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm really concerned about like the pushiness with that. It felt really uncomfortable. I'm not sure how far into his career, because like I said, I don't actually follow Dr. K. So I don't know what time span is between when he first started out to when he talks to Yvonne. Like, I don't know if it's like a year, if it's 2 months. But yeah, I was not a big fan of that. That was really, really inappropriate. Like I wouldn't be surprised if the ethics board, to be honest, I think if he gets in trouble for anything, it'll be more so that stuff actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I mean, if there's anything you want to ask and say, that's fine. I feel like I'm asking a lot of the questions here.
Sure. I want to maybe get into ethics because I think there's a lot of confusion about morality and risk. Because, for example, when we go back, let's go back to the pregnancy and the birth situation. Therapists who would decide not to go would do so not because of typically risk of hurting client, but more so fundamentally like the liability, legality, blurriness. And so a big issue to me, for example, in some of the people in the Dr. K. Reckful interview is when I heard them talk about ethics, it felt like they took ethics as basically like a way to like mostly be as self-interested as possible and protect like themselves and then justify their self-protection by being like, but it helps the client. And it's like, well, why? And they're like, well, it makes things less blurry. And it's like, well, being blurry isn't inherently harmful. And so I remember there's one person on that documentary, she talked about how like it's actually more ethical to charge the maximum amount, because if you charge less than that and give pro bono and like cheaper stuff, you're actually confusing the client, and that's harmful. And I remember being so angry because I'm just like, fuck, like, we can't be using ethics to justify helping people less. Like, that's fucking horrible. And that was like my whole point with like all the Dr. K stuff is I'm like, yeah, I think he did breach ethics at points, but I genuinely think at least started with the goal of actually trying to help people. And sometimes certain codified practice limits this. Now, there's good reason for the codes. I'm not opposed to the codes either. I just wish that there was like more in this Twitch space. There was more of this dual conversation about like, ethics are both for the client and for protecting the practitioner. And sometimes we overemphasize protecting the practitioner and then we underserve the client. And that to me is a really big problem.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty reasonable. I guess like how does that map on to like with Dr. K? Like, do you think there were times when people were criticizing Dr. K for some ethical concern where it was only the benefit to him that was of concern and not the client, say?
Yeah, like for example, when people are building this narrative of that, like he's plotting and he's like, I think you had said like, do you think that when Byron came on, he felt like he had caught a big fish and stuff like that? It like builds this idea of like, he's breaching the ethics for the sole goal of helping himself, essentially. Like he's pushing the edges of ethics for purely himself. Actually, I feel like I'm deviating away from your question. Do you want to re-ask your question? I think I literally didn't answer your question at all.
No, sure. I mean, I just want to be clear as well. You know, I don't see doctors. I don't see Indian doctors as being particularly devious. You know, and I don't think that he would be kind of like, ha ha ha, yes, I'm going to get loads of views off of this. I think it is just an unfortunate outcome of incentives because, you know, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. If the incentive is viewership, naturally having juicier kind of clients and stuff, you know, is going to be beneficial. Now, sorry, I'm not asking the question, but there's a point I wanted to make earlier, and I'll just quickly make it now. This is completely anecdotal, okay? So take it with a pinch of salt. Obviously, I haven't got a fucking study for this. But I spoke to someone, Bryce, who had dealt with Dr. K, and had spoken to him on a live stream. And the way that he told me the story is that it felt like Dr. K was pushing hard to get Bryce to admit to be like a cringy, like ego mod, you know, desperate for attention, giving her money. And that isn't really what Bryce is like. That wasn't the situation he was presenting. But it seemed like Dr. K was quite keen to present it in that way or try and like, you know, tease that out of him. And then when he discovered that it wasn't like an exciting circumstance of some cringy mod with an ego, you know, he kind of cast him aside almost, and I wasn't particularly interested in dealing with him further and kind of moved the show on. Now, obviously, that's just one example of something someone's told me, but I just wonder if, and maybe it's even gotten better now, but early on, if there was that sort of mentality of like, you know, I've got to find someone interesting to talk to, not in a malicious way, but just simply because he's trying to grow and he's trying to grow an audience, and it just is a natural outcome of that sort of endeavor. So, yeah, sorry, I don't know if I really asked the question again, but I just wanted to highlight that I don't think he's devious or something, you know, I think it's just like the nature of the beast.
Okay, so maybe I could summarize to understand your position. Are you feeling that basically because there's potentially a perverse incentive that like everything that Dr. K is doing should be avoided? Everything Dr. K is doing should be avoided because there's a potential for perverse incentive.
Not well. I don't think the concept in and of itself is a problem. I think that it seems like there wasn't enough, and you know, this is somewhat evidence, I think, by the fact that Dr. K himself recognizes the legal issues that he was kind of getting himself into and doing some of this. I've mentioned at least once, you know, I could have lawyers coming at me for this and so on. But yeah, I think that yeah, it's like, you know, he's not like I say, he's not being devious. It is just the fact, you know, that he is kind of got this incentive of building viewership, and it's kind of like not a conscious thing he's doing, but it's kind of playing in the back of his mind, and it's influencing your every action in ways that you can't even consciously recognize at times, you know?
Yeah. So, do you think that paid therapy should be avoided then, like as much as possible, like paying for therapy?
I don't think, no, because I don't think that you can avoid the financial transaction. You know, we live in a society founded on capitalism. Paying for things is how society works. So paid therapy is the way. I mean, the one thing I would say is ideally, and it's a long-term goal, we should get to a position where therapy is free at the point of service, and it's funded through some sort of like NHS or something like that, right? But that's kind of a pipe dream. I think the reality is you need paid therapy, because otherwise we wouldn't have therapists, right?
Yeah, and this is why when people kind of bring up like there's a potential for perverse incentive with Dr. K, I'm kind of like, any paid therapy, there's always going to be like a potential for perverse incentive, because if you're a really bad actor as a therapist, your main goal is going to be, if you fix them too quickly, they're going to stop paying you. Now, in fairness, I don't think most therapists operate this way, because I think we do enough vetting that for the most part, people go into therapy acting as good actors with like good intentions, right? But like the idea that because there's potential for perversion and like being abused by a bad actor shouldn't be the reason we avoid things overall, right? In the case of Dr. K, there is this potential for perverse incentive, absolutely, but you've got to take that into account of is he a bad actor or not? Because if he's not going in as being a bad actor, well, then he's kind of operating the same domain, just he's working in a different, and he's also exposing and reaching a population that has no exposure to therapy and very minimal exposure to psychotherapy, and like for the most part is probably a little bit reticent about ever going into that. And as I think in at least the gaming world has probably really, really normalized mental health and therapy for probably the Twitch community abroad, which is an obvious harm. Now, if Dr. K is a bad actor, now there's all of these risks associated, but this is why it's like, it's really hard to assume. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt, but if it comes out later that he is all these like terrible bad actors, that's really bad. But the potential of perverse incentive shouldn't be the reason why we say it's all bad and we should avoid it.
Sure. I think, I mean, I guess it goes, we kind of touched on this earlier, I think, but it's like, if I come to you and I say, hey, I'm addicted to meth, and you say, okay, well, I'll help you out. It's $200 a session or whatever you charge. That is and it's going to happen in private, and it's going to be a one-on-one session. That is like a very simple and easy to understand transaction, right? And we understand like whatever power dynamic that's there, and things like that. But then
sort of, it's normal. The issue that we actually have with, like, for example, I don't know if you know much about like fit or like therapy evaluation, but right now there's this huge growing issue with the fact that like, because therapy is so behind closed doors and so overly protected, that we don't actually know which therapists are efficacious or if clients are actually being properly served, because it's so now behind closed doors. Like on the flip side, while Dr. K is like being publicly exposed, if he gives bad therapy, like when he pushes Yvonne, everyone sees it and can like jump down their throat immediately. Whereas like therapists who are maybe not bad intended, they're just kind of shitty and don't do a very good job, can be collecting people's money for years, not really helping anyone, and nobody will know better because it's behind closed doors. So like, this is the trade-off that we always have with all of these things, is like, and as a society, we just have to decide, like, there are these trades and risks, but I don't want to act like one is obviously good and one is obviously bad when they're both complex.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, because to me, I agree with you that there's definitely a way that we can like tease it out a little bit and have more of like, and not an open door policy, but we can have a bit more visibility of what's going on there. I agree with that. I don't think it needs to be, but it seems like I'm saying to you, you got the closed door behind closed doors thing saying, yeah, it needs to be opened out a bit. But then we're talking about, moving it to 110%, and it's broadcast live to thousands of gamers, in a completely uncontrolled setting. And that's the other thing as well, is I think that, you want to be able to control, to me anyway, as many factors as you can when you're doing this stuff, right? So even if you do want to publicize or broadcast it in some way, and that's going to have some benefit, that's got to be in a very controlled, measured way. And you've got to have your hands on the reins at all times, right? And I feel like taking it all the way out to, we broadcast it live to thousands of people, we have subs on and we have donors coming in, you're losing a lot of that control I think you would need to have in order to make sure your client is in the best possible setting, to get the best possible care. So yeah, I feel like, we're kind of moving too far in that direction. And I don't know if the idea that we need to bring it out into the open a bit more is in itself a justification for, streaming it all on Twitch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that's a fair enough position to take. I think the issue is, number one, we don't have any quantified data to figure it out, right? For example, how would you feel if, like, this doesn't exist, just to be clear, so everyone hears this research doesn't exist, but say we did research and we found out that not only was Dr. K helpful a little bit, but he was significantly more impactful in improving mental health more than almost all private counseling altogether, which doesn't exist, just to be clear. But what would we do if we found out not only was it effective, it was exceedingly effective and helping broad populace mental well-being to improve?
So sorry, you're saying if there was data that showed what he was doing, even of the perceived risk. Yeah,
everything's the same. Nothing's different. All the risks and all the potential perversion and stuff is there, but we get data that it is vastly improving everyone's well-being, including people who come on the show. Not only the people who come on the show, most of them improve, but also people watching are vastly improving. So he's having huge mental health benefits.
Yeah, I mean that would be, it'd be great, but I guess the thing is, to get that data, what you would need to do is you'd need to go to like a research ethics board, wouldn't you, and get a permission, giving a guideline of what you want to do, and the ethics board would look at it and go, right, you want to do this study to see what the impact of this is going to be, and they then sign off on it based on the criteria of what they're proposing, right? So if it feels like to get that data is great, and that'd be great if we could see that, but we'd need to get it signed off by an ethics board before we even think about looking at getting that data, because again, you want to take like a risk perhaps, but you need to make sure that the risk isn't in excess, and again, you're letting go of the reins to the point where there could be harm caused, and that's exactly where an ethics board would come in and look at this. Sure. I actually spoke to someone from an ethics board, and they said that, based on what they looked at with the Dr. K stuff, it seemed like there was some elements of what Dr. K were doing that was almost like research. Like, it's almost like he's trying to research this, but he isn't really going about it in the best possible way, and getting it signed off. So he's kind of almost packaging it up in a certain way that allows him to, be flexible and try this and try that, but without, fully getting it signed off. So I don't know, like if Dr. K had done it the right way and gone and got like signed off on a research board and done it, I think that would have been great. But, it's not how it's played out.
Yeah, it's interesting. From my understanding, he does have a bit of an ethics board that oversees him at this point. And I would say he's clearly pushing the boundaries of what is acceptable. I guess my question would be, say an ethics board said that everything is okay and we do collect, or for whatever reason, we are able to have the data available. And the data was showing that it had a vast net positive. Would you be okay not just with Dr. K continuing, but maybe also rinsing and repeating his model to have like societal wide mental health improvement?
Yeah, that'd be fine. But then I think, if to get that, we'd already have had all those stages to evidence that this was something that wasn't going to cause like a dramatic risk. But I mean, obviously, if there's something that is proven to be having a positive impact and an outcome, and the risks that we're concerned about aren't there and aren't being, aren't causing concern, then yeah, you'd have to say, yes, that's great. Yeah, we'd go with that.
What if the risks are there, but the net positive seems to vastly be outweighing some of the, because anything that we do, there's going to be some level of risk, right? That's why there's a risk with closed door therapy as well. And individual therapy is, there's a risk in that we can't really guarantee the quality overall. We can guarantee the quality as much as we can by preventative measures, right? Ensuring that our staff are trained, ensuring that we have close vetting processes of like what it takes to become a psychologist and stuff like that. So we do what we can to prevent, to ensure highest level of quality. But once the doors close, there isn't a lot of quality insurance, other than like sometimes they'll do like weekly stuff, which is an actual issue. And so the issue with Dr. K is he is pushing the boundaries. He's doing it according to him. We just take him at his word. He's pushing the boundaries because he thinks people's needs aren't being met, and he thinks that this is the new modality essentially to access and achieve meeting those needs. And I think there's a little part of me that's being like, what if he's right though? Like, I think his model could be improved, but what if he's right?
Well, if he's right, get an ethics board to look at what he's proposing, and they can sign off on it, and they can, do whatever shit they do to go, right, is this meeting our standard of what a study needs to be in order to get some data out of it? And I think that's the thing, is it's difficult for me to answer because I don't know in depth enough to know. But surely if you went to an ethics board with a proposal about what you wanted to do, they're going to go, right, this is okay, you need to change this, you need to change this. And then you're good to go. You've got that oversight. And I think that's the thing. And you sort of identified this yourself. It's all about oversight. If Dr. K has got approval to do anything, any crazy shit, as long as an ethics board have gone, we've looked over it, we've done the due diligence, go ahead, here's some proposals of what you need to do. I don't know exactly how it works. There would be no problem,
Right.
So yeah, I think that if with more due diligence, the model could potentially be viable. If it's looked over and it's fine tooth comb and the due diligence done, fine. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, and so this is the difference between research and therapy. A lot of time is I think that there are, yeah. Oh man, there's a couple of ways I want to respond. I would agree with the oversight. It's just, I guess the main issue I have with this is that I could be wrong, but I feel like a lot of people are saying that if he was just a layman, then that would be fine. And then it's like, well, if he's a layman, he can't have oversight. So like, why is this worse because he's a professional? And I don't know if you're arguing for that. I feel like we talked about this a little bit, but just understand, do you feel like it would be okay if he was a layman? I feel like I remember you saying yes, but I don't want to misquote you.
I mean, I guess it's difficult for me to answer because I just think, well, if he was a layman, it totally changes the context of what's happening to the point where it wouldn't be the same thing. I don't think a layman it would be possible for them to do the same thing that Dr. K does.
Having especially with I think the main thing a layman couldn't do would be talking a bit about medicine and certain research, but I feel like basically everything else a layman could do. If you're really good at people, you've read a lot of philosophy, maybe some spiritual books, and you are really good at understanding people, there's to be honest, I think there are lay people who do this all the time.
Well, okay, I guess the way I put it is
coaches and stuff like that.
I personally wouldn't like the idea of someone doing what Dr. K did as a layman even. But at the end of the day, there's no ethics oversight. So what can I do to stop it? There's nothing to stop someone, doing that. I personally would take issue with it. If there was some guru type person that was like, hey, I've learned all this shit. I can fix all your problems. Come to me. Oh yeah, fucking your dosha's out of whack. Here's what you need to do. Da, da, da. There's nothing I could do to stop that. And in fact, this is something that happens a lot. There's a lot of people that do this kind of stuff already. And you've got coaching and stuff like that. Now, I wouldn't have a problem with coaching in and of itself, but if it's going into detail about suicide attempts and mental health and stuff like that, yeah, that's probably a line for me, and I wouldn't like it. But because there's no oversight, there's nothing I can really do, I guess.
I think
so. If somebody is doing what Dr. K is doing, is Dr. K worse or better than them morally because he's a professional? Assuming that they're both doing the same stuff, because coaches do go into this stuff and lay people do. There are literally trauma coaches on TikTok who have people come on their TikTok lives and do this shit. And I know all they're trained in is they're called trauma-informed coaches, and they go into people's sexual assault and stuff like that. And it's they're lay people and there is no oversight. So is Dr. K morally better or worse than them?
At the end of the day, if you got some fucking nutter hippie on TikTok that meets some guru and the guru's like, oh, Shangri-La, fucking come to me and I'll help you. They're a fucking idiot. I feel bad for them, but, they're an idiot that's been suckered in by some fucking, self-help dipshit. But I think what changes is when you say, I am a Harvard-educated psychiatrist, Dr. K. I think that people are going to naturally have, it's more about the perception of you as a doctor. I think that changes the context dramatically because, people are looking to you as a medical professional and they're putting a lot more faith in you. And people should be able to put their faith in a doctor, And I think it's the way that that person is perceived that then changes the context of what's happening because you're kind of putting yourself in the care of this person, but they're not doing things which are like if I went to my doctor and they said, right, take this medicine for 2 weeks and that's the recommended treatment and everyone agrees that's the way to do it, great. But if I went to the doctor and they were like, look, well, I'm going to stick a pineapple at your ass once a week. That's the treatment that I recommend. And it's a bit of a test they're doing. They've not really got it checked out properly, but that's what they think they want to do, to see if that works. Then, yeah, I'm going to take issue with that, that's going to be a bigger problem for me because, I'm going to the doctor and I've trust the doctor to do the right thing and what's kind of approved. I'm going to trust that they've got the ethics on, the ethics on their side and so on. And I just, that's basically my answer, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so if it's not about the letter of like the codified ethics, then it's fundamentally about harm at a moral level, right? Who's doing worse? So then the question to me is who's doing worse? Who's doing more harm? The layperson who's doing the same stuff as Dr. K or Dr. K?
Well, I think that the harm comes about because of the perception of someone being a doctor and the faith that that person is putting into them. They're more likely to follow like the instructions of a doctor. And I think this is even something that's been evidenced in studies, that if there's a figure of authority, you're more likely to be inclined to follow along with what they're saying because of their position. I think if someone perceives someone as a doctor, they're more likely to follow their instructions than if they don't, or something like that. So yeah, I think we put a lot of faith in doctors, we put a lot of faith in healthcare, and one's perception of that is what makes the difference, and leads people to be more trusting.
Yeah, I suppose if you're willing to even go to a coach, like a random trauma-informed coach, you are kind of putting your faith in them, especially if you're paying them money. Like you're inherently saying, I'm buying in.
But they've got no professional qualifications. I mean, look, it
I
sucks. I
know.
don't like it. I don't like it, but that's, that person's a fucking moron at the end of the day. But if someone is putting faith in a doctor, that isn't like a moronic or stupid thing to do. That's what we should do. We should put our faith in doctors, and also if we have these circumstances where we're putting faith in doctors and they're letting us down and they're not doing what they should be doing as per the letter of the ethics and the law, it also erodes trust in like the medical institution. And I think, that's a big thing for me as well. I think having faith in the medical institution so people can trust doctors and can trust medical professionals to follow the rules and do the right things.
And that's why I would basically say, like, you should, if you're concerned about Dr. K, you should report him to the ethics board with everything. However, if it turns out that what he's doing is vastly helping and that as a professional, he mostly made the right judgment call and that this like new means of like how he's doing mental health care is actually having a very vast net positive, then the ethics are going to actually adjust to reflect that. But if what he's doing is a vast net negative, right, there's going to be a larger consequence because he's a professional. I would agree with that, right? The issue is that there's a lot of really firm statements being made about Dr. K, one way or the other, that we just really don't have any data to make claims on, and then we're like making claims of like obvious self-evident harm and all these things when it's like most of these things aren't actually that obvious, which is why you should send it to the ethics board because they'll have the best way of judging and determining that.
Sure, but I mean, we're closing the door after the horse is bolted or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it strikes me. I mean, Dr. K himself recognized the legal ramifications and issues. I don't know what due diligence he did in full before he kind of got into this. But my understanding is he didn't, before he did this, consult any sort of ethics board to get any sort of idea or clearance or insight into what was going on. Now, I could be wrong. I'll admit that maybe he did look more so than I know. But it seems like if you are taking such big risks with a new idea about how to, deliver medical care to people or therapy or whatever, it seemed to make sense to just get the, T's crossed and the I's dotted before you do that. And obviously, in my mind, it didn't happen anyway.
A lot of new therapies definitely don't go through that process where they like are like, I want to do this new therapy form, and then they submit it to like, because there isn't really an ethics board to submit it to like try a new style. It's like mostly like people like conjure and like study and like come up with stuff. Like if you talk about like Rogerian therapy, right? Kind of just started doing this model of practice and then mostly like post hoc did research to figure out if it was working or not. So like the idea that you should dot your I's and cross your T's before you start a new style isn't really true. The issue for him is that, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but that seems to me not to be about a broad project that you're thinking about doing of issuing some level of care to multiple people, like, on this basis. It's more so, I've got an idea about a type of therapy or a talking therapy that I could do that I think is going to have an impact, right? So then like on a small basis, you might trial it with a few people and see how it goes. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Are you like a pilot? Not often. A lot of it's going to be like somewhat like philosophically developed and then just like somewhat put into practice. And then you're going to start like seeing if it works. And like different modalities are going to come from different places. And so like the way that new therapies are made isn't it's not as unidirectional as you're saying. Sometimes it is, but there's lots of other therapies, for example, that don't. And just to clarify about Dr. K, my understanding is he did talk to professionals. I think in one of his streams, he talks about how he did talk to lots of people around him, and they told him that it was dangerous, but that it wasn't necessarily against the ethics. That was my understanding. And now he has an ethics group that like oversees him. Like he's developed that over time.
Okay.
Which is kind of that post hoc like adjustion that I would expect professionals to make, is like if things are growing and building and it seems to have some good, but there's maybe some negatives, you should start getting an overseeing board. And like maybe the board that oversees him is like they're all his buddies and friends, so none of them are like willing to actually speak negatively about them. Like I don't know the internal workings of that, but I
mean, if that's the case, and as he's gained more, ethics stuff going on, I don't know. It just seems funny to me that as he's gained more in that area, it seems like some of the stuff he was doing initially is, kind of stopped a lot of the time. I mean, I don't know. I mean, listen, I'm painting a massive narrative here. I just wonder if it's like, look, you got this ethics board together. They're like, listen, mate, you can't be doing that shit. What are you playing at? And maybe that's why he's had to rein back in some of this stuff. I don't know. That's just my concept of it. But,
possibly. Yeah. And if it's the case that he was doing a major net positive and he shouldn't be reining back that shit, it'll be a real big shame if the ethics board is like pulling him back if he's having mostly a net positive. But if he's having mostly a net negative, or even if he's having a net positive for viewers, but a vast net negative for people that come on, I also think that you should roll back the shit, because I think fundamentally the person that matters more in that dynamic is going to be the person who comes on than just the viewers. I guess for me, I get stuck on this place of basically being like, who would I want fulfilling this role of like kind of like this emotional coach, Dr. K or like a random fuck? I prefer Dr. K every single time, because if he fucks up, it's public. There's an ethics board to go to. And because he's part of a professional institute, there are course corrections to like adjust it if something goes wrong. Whereas if it's a random layman, that's how people end up like dead or like broke and like fully taken advantage of. That's kind of my view, is like there's things to criticize about Dr. K, and you should, because he's a professional in this field. That's exactly why he's a professional, is that there are methods of course correction. And if the course correction is so big that they like take away his license, then like fair enough. Like that's what the ethics boards decide. I actually prefer him to be in this venue than a layperson, because at least there's a correction if he's bad.
I guess one interesting aspect though, so you're talking a lot about like the net positive side of things, right?
Yeah.
So how in your mind do you balance the net positive concept with ensuring, I mean, I don't know, it's a very classic example, but you've got a patient that's got organs that can fit 5 people. The net positive would be to dish the organs out to these 5 people. So how do you balance that, do you think?
Sorry, I'm not sure I'm understanding. So there's an organ donor.
But listen, there's some.
Are they alive still? Okay. I don't think I'm understanding.
Yeah. Listen. So there's a fella, right? And he's in a bad way. He's in a coma, but he, could recover. Very likely to recover. Okay, and he's fucking going breathing machine and that. And the doctors are going, right, listen, we've got this fella here now. The most positive and for the greater good. This guy's probably going to die, but we could save him. We're going to slice him up, and there's 5 organ donors waiting, and we're going to give his 5 organs to these 5 different people. If your focus is more so on like the greater good, well, what's to stop you from killing that person in order to distribute their organs amongst people that are going to live?
So we're assuming he's in a coma and he hasn't previously consented to like being an organ donor.
He's not consented. Like he's not consented. He's healthy. He's in a coma. He'll probably recover. But yeah, that's basically it.
So I can answer this, but in this case, I would have to shift the hypothetical if you want it to apply to Dr. K, because there is a level of consent in that, like there are forms and stuff signed off on beforehand. So in this case,
aside from consent, we're talking about like focusing purely on the greater good, right? That's the focus.
Right, but at the harm of somebody else, right? Like the guy in the coma, if you take all his organs, there's no chance he'll ever wake up, and he hasn't consented. So it's basically like a utilitarian cost-benefit analysis, basically. Like, is it better to save the 5 or the 1? Essentially, right? Or preserve exactly, the 1. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I'm pretty sure this is codified by law, so I'd probably defer first and foremost to like what the codified. I think doctors have literally answered this, so I always just defer to the law because I think like the law's probably figured out what works best for society. And you're saying consent doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter as consent. Basically, do I pull the lever on the train? I'm trying to think, what is my answer usually to the train question? I think I always pull the lever because if I'm assuming, for example, basically, this is my thought. I always pull the lever to save the 5 over the 1 because if the 1 was any person of like any level of moral value, especially if there's very like we don't know if he's going to wake up, a good person would probably also want to donate their organs more or less. So like we save 5, and let's assume a good person would probably want you to save 5 as well. So typically in that case, I pull the lever.
Okay,
but
so
I don't know if the lever situation plays to Dr. K super well.
No, sure, yeah. But just to confirm, you're the doctor. Right, so you're stood there with the scalpel, you're taking the organs out and you're giving them to the 5 people. Is that right? And this person's health. Let's say this person, they're in a coma, but they're healthy and they're going to survive. Okay, but you're happy to take the organs.
Like wake up or survive, like be in a vegetative state.
They're gonna survive and wake up.
Oh well, if they're gonna wake up, that's really different, I guess, to me.
But with the trolley problem, you're saying that you're going to kill the 1 to save the 5, right?
Again, in the trolley problem, we're like in hypothetical land. So if we want to stick to purely hypothetical, like there's going to be no ethical or legal or any ramifications for me as a doctor, I guess maybe we would donate the 5 as well, because again, a good person would want that. But because he's going to wake up, we now have all of these like it's hard to like engage fully in the hypothetical land of this because there's all of these like practical things that are going to like play out.
There is another hypothetical though. Say it's legal. You're looking for 5 people are in a car. They all get in a car wreck. Each one of them needs something like a heart, a lung, a kidney, things like that. But one person's perfectly fine. Nothing happened to them. Do we take that one person and give each one of their organs to the other 4 people so that 4 people can survive? Or do we let the 4 people die and let the one person survive?
So this is where I get stuck, where I'm like, okay, well, in a practical sense, no, so the reason why we never do this as doctors is because like there's practical limitations. For example, like if you give a transplant, there's a pretty high chance that a body can reject a transplant. So you're killing a fully functional person and giving it to somebody who is going to be constantly immunosuppressed because they have to take immunosuppressors so that their body doesn't reject their transplant. So like, this is why the trolley, like you can work it at a hypothetical, but then once you start being like, are you going to be the doctor to cut out the organs if he's for sure going to wake up? And it's like, well, no, because of a practical sense, like there's actually a lot of like harm that can be done. Like even if you transplant the heart, what if they get rejected? Now you've just killed an entire person for basically another person to not even be saved. And also, but we need to. I guess we need to kind of take that out of the equation, right? So it's like these organs are going to go into these bodies, and they're definitely going to, go. These 5 people are going to survive, and that one person is going to die. You're saying that the only thing that would stop you from doing that is some sort of ethical guideline or boundary, right? The reason why we're not doing the saving the 5 and versus the 1 is some level of like ethical. Yeah, because fundamentally, like this is where I think utilitarianism falls apart, right? Is that you can't only wait. This is why I said, for example, in the Dr. K, if we want to extrapolate it back to Dr. K, a utilitarian cost benefit by itself has issues because it doesn't take into things like human rights. And as a society, we care a lot about human rights. So in one single situation where maybe you could save 5 to cost the 1, at a utilitarian pure sense, we might choose the 5, but at a societal, like more broad utilitarian sense, we don't want to live in society where even if you're going to wake up, we just harvest your organs anyways, because you're not really there to fight against it. We don't want a society that looks like that. And so this is why the utilitarian cost analysis of the lever is useful to understand how you process things, but it doesn't map onto practicality. That's why I said with Dr. K, for example, maybe he's having a net benefit to society. He's helping most people, but if he's vastly harming the individuals that he's working with, I said that would still be unethical because we care about human rights. And that is we want a society who cares about it. I said the only reason I would be for it is if it has a broad net positive for the people he interviews and the viewers. It would have to be both. Okay. Yeah. I guess because the issue I've got here is, so if we're looking at the person, the 5 organs going out and saving 5 people, medical ethics or whatever it is, there's probably some medical ethics. I don't know the exact fucking line of the letter of the law, but there's inevitably going to be some level of ethics that say you cannot kill a healthy patient
even if that killing would mean more people are healthy and survive, right? Because then that puts a bad onus on the doctor, right? So
we don't want a society that works like that. Yeah, we don't want institutions that do that. Mm-hmm.
So the point I'm trying to get to with this really is that Dr. K could have an absolutely, phenomenal outcome, right? He could be doing absolutely amazing stuff, but there could be some sort of ethical concern or consideration that we have in place where we say, even though you're doing amazing stuff and you're having these great outcomes, there's some sort of fundamental ethical issue that is going to prevent you from doing this. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I do understand what you're saying. I'm basically, maybe I'll give you another hypothetical. Let's do the same hypothetical, but in this case, Dr. K is giving medicine to 10 different people. 8 of them are going to broadly improve. 2 of them are not going to improve. 1 of them might even worsen. And there's 900 people watching. And of the 900, 70% of them also improve. Is it still worth doing what he's doing, even though 2 of it, the direct people he helped?
I think my hypotheticals were better and simpler.
They were simpler, but they didn't map on because in this case, Dr. K is not harvesting organs from the people he's talking to.
Okay.
In a hypothetical way. I know I'm not saying he's literally. I know you're not saying that.
But the thing is, the reason I'm talking about that is because what I'm trying to demonstrate is that there could be an action a doctor could take which could cause because it was an overwhelming good, The gains are far, far, far more than the losses, right? But in order to retain trust in the medical industry, to make sure that doctors, aren't put in these difficult situations and don't have to make these difficult decisions, we have a base guideline that would say, you cannot kill someone to harvest their organs because there's other risks, some which might not even be directly related to any of this, right? Mm-hmm. There's some other risks that we need to take into consideration when we're setting our ethical guidelines, right?
Like so the stem point cell I'm making, research for a pro-lifer.
Sure. And so the reason I'm mentioning this, I feel it maps on quite well because what you're saying is, if the outcomes are fantastical and phenomenal, we should go ahead with it. And I'm saying, yeah, that's great. But if there's some sort of foundational ethical issue that Dr. K is causing, even if he's having phenomenal outcomes, we still shouldn't proceed because it's going to breach some baseline ethics principle that we should not breach for a good reason, potentially.
Sort of, except the thing that he's breaching in this case is more like kind of tertiary psychological ethics. And in the hypothetical you gave me with the organs, we're violating human rights and law. So it's different. He's not breaching human rights, Dr. K.
But when you're talking about it, the way that you're positioning it, because I'm taking that out of the equation because you seem to be saying that if he's bringing about some phenomenal, great benefit to society, it doesn't really matter if he's potentially breaking a couple of rules along the way, as long as the outcome is good enough, then that justifies that. And I just don't think that that's a good way to look at it. I mean, if I'm wrong, tell me, but that seems to be what you're saying.
It might be because the ethics that he's violating aren't like human rights and foundational law. They're ethics that are codified for a form of practice that might be limited by the lack of technology. And him having this net positive might mean that the ethics need to be updated so that we can do as much good and prevent as much harm as possible.
So how do you think we should update those ethics? Because it seems to be that we should just say, well, give it a go, see what happens. And if it turns out we're doing better, we'll change the ethics later. Would it not be better to look at the ethics beforehand and make sure they're fit for purpose and analyze them and change them before we participate on these sorts of things?
Sure. So if you don't mind, I'd like to I want to explain the hierarchy of ethics, and I don't want to mansplain. So if you understand, and I know that this has happened before, I'm really not trying to do an appeal to authority at all. It's just it's a nuance of ethics that you might not know. So in medical ethics, typically we have a hierarchy of ethics. And so typically do no harm is at the top. And in a lot of these weird ethical conundrums, like the birth one, typically we allow some breaching of ethics for to basically yield to higher level of ethics. So if there's an ethics on privacy, but you breach privacy, for example, you tell the cops that your client is about to go murder somebody, you're going to breach one ethic, which is privacy, but you're going to do it in the name of a higher ethic, which is do no harm. And I believe do no harm is maximize good, essentially, right? And so in the case of Dr. K, he is breaching ethics. He's pushing ethics as well, but he might be pushing ethics in the name of higher ethics, which is basically do no harm and also do good to the world, non-maleficence and beneficence. So dual relationships should be avoided in general, unless it doesn't do damage, for example, to your ability to do therapy. And also if you think that it might improve your ability to do good. That's why, for example, in like most small towns, most doctors and psychologists have tons of dual relationships, because being able to offer therapy to people, even if you know their family and friends and them personally, is more good to that person than just avoiding the weird like messiness of a dual relationship. So in this case, what I'm saying is there are absolutely ethics being breached by Dr. K, but he might be breaching lower tier ethics in the name of higher. And this is why I want an ethics board to evaluate it, because if they disagree with that, I'm willing to be wrong. But this is kind of how it appears to me, and this is how Dr. K is characterizing it as well.
But is that how an ethics board is going to analyze this? Are they going to do studies, or are they going to say you broke? Okay.
No, they're always going to appeal to the hierarchy. So typically when you learn them, principle 1 matters more than principle 2. And you're taught typically, if you have 2 ethics at conflict and one's in principle 2 and one's at principle 1, you breach at principle 2 for the name of principle 1.
Okay. So in terms of like a dual relationship, like, sex, would that be considered as part of a dual relationship and therefore a lower tier on the ethics conundrum?
So sex actually violates the most important one, which is do no harm. Because in a lot of cases, sex always leads to harm with therapists. There's actually a very explicit, so unlike most dual relationships are very vague in nature in how they outline it, excluding sex. There is very specific, if you go to the APA 7, there's an entire section exclusively on sex with clients and how long you have to wait after you've seen a client before you could potentially ever have sex with them, which is basically recommended never, but like at least 2 years. And also how long it has to be like before you, like there's a bunch of very, very, very precise rules, because this is a case where dual relationships seems to precisely enact on non-maleficence and beneficence.
Okay. What if the client said, I'm going to kill myself unless you have sex with me? Because then would you not be breaching a lower ethical standard to save the person's life? Is that not how it would work?
Well, typically, if they're threatening suicide and also like attaching a thing, we're also allowed to breach confidentiality and say, well, if you're threatening to kill yourself that seriously, I'm going to either form you, commit you, or like send you to a hospital, because you're at such high risk of wanting to kill yourself that you're going to the level of, I'm going to have sex with you, right? So that's where you could absolutely report them elsewhere.
Okay. So I guess the thing is, I know you're saying send it to the ethics board. Obviously, I agree with that. And the thing is you're saying that maybe he is breaching some lower tier ethics for some, greater tier concept. I guess I just don't really see it.
Sorry, you don't see which?
I don't see in what ways Dr. K's lower level breaches of ethics are of a benefit to the client at the higher level of ethics that we're talking about. Like, I don't see how Dr. K is doing something that, is potentially like a breach of ethics for the concept of I'm doing this to do no harm. It seems to me like when he is breaching any sort of ethical standard, it's more a self-involved, self-interested thing of I want to benefit, myself in some way by having this person come onto my stream, and talk to them about their mental health without doing any due diligence.
Right. So you think that he's only breaching ethics basically for himself?
Yeah. I mean, I just don't see what he's breaching that is necessary for him to be protecting and doing no harm to his patients.
Sure. So maybe I'll focus in. So just to be clear, sometimes he doesn't, and sometimes he does. So in the case of Reckful, like the first one, Dr. K is talking to Reckful for the first time. Reckful, within, I think, literally unironically, the first 5 minutes says, "Hi, I'm Reckful. I'm suicidal. I'm depressed. My brother killed himself, and I can't take SSRIs because that's what he took before he suicided. And I've been like depressed my entire life." Right? In that case, I argued that he tried to do no harm, which is rather than giving confidentiality and like moving offline because he was worried about saying basically, "Whoa, that's intense. You're too much for me." Instead, he tried to help in that conversation. This is why, though, I say following that, I think that he got into messy territory. Now, he might have still been trying to say, "I'm trying to do no harm." Maybe Reckful's more comfortable publicly. I don't know his thought process behind that. But regardless, I think his thought process of having the continuing conversations isn't obvious to me that he's now doing no harm, because the biggest harm when somebody like on stream tells you something is you don't want to communicate to them, especially as a practitioner. That's too intense. Just go see a therapist, because it just shuts the person down, and they're also probably not going to go see a therapist.
I mean, wait. I mean, obviously in a one-on-one situation, I accept that you're not going to want to do that, right? Because one-on-one circumstance. But you said on stream, I mean, this is like an unknown thing. I mean, on stream, surely being more conservative would be the better way to go about it, and taking a step back and going, maybe we should speak offline first.
So if we're going to take the like maybe being conservative is like always the better ethical principle, some therapists outright refuse to have suicidal clients because of the messiness that comes with them, the ethical messiness. So that's a really conservative take on the ethics. They're completely on the ethical right. Yeah, but I would argue that they're breaching the do no harm or beneficence.
But that's an extreme example, because if everyone had that perspective, then suicidal patients wouldn't get seen. So that's going to cause a problem.
Which is why I would say, even though they're ethically clear based on the ethics they're purporting, that's actually ethically bad for the field as a whole to do that.
But taking a conservative perspective on, whether I should speak to this person on stream further is very different to having a conservative perspective. The outcome of that, right, is going to be that one person isn't spoken to on stream, and you arrange a time to speak privately to, deal with the issue. So the outcome is very different. There isn't like a massive issue of like, in the example you give, where with that world, no one who's suicidal gets seen. With this, it's just, you don't speak to them on stream, you have a conversation off stream, and you go from there.
Is this based on the Reckful thing where, like, are you saying he should have stopped the moment Reckful mentioned, like, that he was suicidal and just gone off stream? Is that what you're saying? Would be the more ethical, conservative thing to do?
Well, yeah, I'm just saying that to me, it would seem that it would make more sense, particularly if you're in this newfound area, to make more conservative ethical decisions than make more, reckless or risky ethical decisions.
I basically would say like a lot of therapists outweigh like not being conservative, because they see that if everyone in the field is always conservative, it broadly just does harm. And so in this case, I think with Reckful, he stayed public in the first conversation because he recognized that it would be more conservative, but it also might have shut Reckful down. It's probably very unlikely that Reckful would have actually continued the conversation off stream, because he probably would have felt rejected, maybe wouldn't have really been willing to go into it. But after that, I think there's a lot of question to be had about why he continued the public conversations. I think that is really, really fair.
Chud, let me ask you a question that might clear this up. So let's say say you're a therapist, you have a family member who's suicidal. Instead of recommending them to go see another therapist, because they're not going to go see another therapist, you start treating them personally. This might have some like ethical issues, but you're also more worried about like the moral issues of just not helping this person and allowing them to just possibly go commit suicide instead. I think this is what she's talking about, where there's like a possible or a potential good that comes from these things, where it might not necessarily line up with the ethics boards. Do you have it?
Well, with some ethics,
right?
But it might be covered by higher ethics, like do no harm or beneficence.
Sure. I mean, I guess the issue is as well, and this brings back the perverse incentives, but if you're making that decision in a vacuum privately, right, you've got a lot of factors under control of what is affecting that decision making. But then when we take it to like the Dr. K example, it's not just your consideration of the patient and what's best for them, it's what's best for your viewership, and it's what's best for your back pocket as well.
He's a Harvard graduate.
But again,
though, right?
if there's perverse incentive, if potential for perverse incentive is makes basically all forms of therapy bad, then any paid therapy could be bad.
Well, no, I'm not. But
always
I'm
perverse incentive in therapy specifically. Yeah.
Sure, but the perverse incentives that exist in therapy are controlled. You've got a lot of control over them, right? The perverse incentives that exist in streaming are nowhere near as controlled as like in a private one-on-one setting.
I don't know if that's inherently true, though, right? If somebody is just kind of like, well, no, if somebody's like kind of a shitty therapist, but they're not super unethical, but they don't really hope their clients get better, and maybe in this case they're a bad actor, they're intentionally not helping their clients get better faster because they want to make as much money as they can from that client, it's going to be really hard to tease apart who's doing that. Like, who's going to catch that? By all ethical standards, they're following everything. So like, how do you catch that? The best is kind of post hoc, it reveals itself, and then you submit them to an ethics board, and then they get in trouble for being a bad actor. But the potential perverse incentive exists in both of these things. And I don't know if one is inherently more controlled than the other.
Okay.
Because on the flip side, when you're super public, if you have a really perverse incentive for money, everyone's going to see it really quickly and you're going to get caught really quickly, theoretically.
Okay, but here's the thing. With streaming, the perverse incentives are not hypothetical or potentials. They are real. They exist. There are two very clear perverse incentives that exist with streaming. One is your viewership, or clout, say, but viewership. The second one is, subs, support. And that's going to be variable. And the likelihood is that if you have a more exciting, juicy interaction of a serious mental health issue, that's likely to bring about more viewership and therefore more money than if you speak to someone who's boring. So those are two things that just do not exist in the private setting, because you don't have the concern of the variableness of like what support you're going to get. You are going to charge a flat fee, to your decision, and that's not going to change whether they're coming in to speak to you about, grief over an abortion or wanting to kill themselves, right? And the viewership is not a concern, so you're not having to worry about entertaining an audience. You can fully focus on the needs of your patient, and that isn't a concern in the slightest. So I just think it's kind of undeniable that the perverse incentives that exist with streaming, make it way worse than having it in a private setting. But you seem to disagree.
Just to be clear, I think the public perverse incentives are larger and basically as you described. But the fact that one is more tangible than the other, I don't know if I would agree. I just think that in the case of streaming, right, there's a lot more unknowns in here, and there's a lot less like, how do we vet for bad actors taking advantage? Whereas in the private setting, it seems like we've mostly solved that answer, but that there is tangible risk for perverse inventors just as much as there is in streaming. We've just taken all those
not just as
actions.
much. Not just as much, because you don't have a viewership to entertain, to build and worry about. And you don't have to worry about, am I going to get enough subs from my stream today to earn enough money? Because you've already agreed what the fee is ahead of time.
Yeah, but you do have to think about the fact, like, okay, well, if I'm say I have a client who's like super inappropriate and abusive in their relationships, I do have an incentive to be somewhat like nicey nice and play warm with them, because I want them to come back. I also want people to keep coming back so that they pay me. These are
material incentives that impact how you will act, your viewership, and how many subs you're going to get.
Same with private enterprise. Absolutely. Every private psychologist you talk to will tell you that there is this strange dynamic with money where they realize that there might be things, for example, that they want to confront or deal with their client that they can't, because they don't know if their client would want to come back. And also they need to be agreeable enough that clients like them enough to keep coming, because if they want to help more people, they need to still pay the bills. Money makes all forms of therapy way more complicated. Always. And this is why I agree with you. In the utopia, there isn't money involved in this situation. That's how we remove this as much as possible. But both of these exist. They're just extremely different. And in one, we've got an institution that's somewhat controlled and regulated it. And in Dr. K's situation, we don't have that yet, which is why I'm advocating that we start doing that.
Sure. But I mean, to me, it just seems obvious that if we're saying that the financial aspects of that relationship are complicated, which I agree. Mm-hmm. And the dynamic is, am I going to see you? How many sessions am I going to see you for? And how much am I going to charge you for each session? Now, tell me if I'm missing something, but that seems to be the consideration primarily over like a normal therapy session. Is there anything else I'm missing?
There's also going to be length. So how much is your insurance going to cover? Well, you only get 8 weeks. So while it seems like maybe some of your issues are deeper, it's not going to be fixed in 8 weeks. So I can either try to give you the therapy that's going to make you feel like a little bit better in 8 weeks, or we can try to figure out how to extend this out so that I give you the full form of therapy that might take you a year and a half, right? There's money complicates, and insurance on top of that, and complicates a lot of these relationships.
Okay.
And then again, if you're a bad actor, then there's more complications, but let's assume that there's not bad actors right now.
So if we take that to online, first issue we've got is it's going to be essentially pro bono. You're a medical professional, you're not charging the person for your time. You are also then going to have a consideration of your viewership and your goal as a streamer is to obtain more viewers. So that's going to be a consideration and influence how you act. And then on top of that, you are going to be monetizing your stream. So you're going to be considerate of how many subs you're getting, which is tied very closely, obviously, to how many viewers you've got. So you're going to want to maximize your viewership in order to maximize the amount of subs you get, right? This is an extra risk, and that makes it worse and more complicated than the basic, therapeutic setting you normally have, surely.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just grant you that.
Okay. Okay.
I'm wondering.
But it still might be worth it. That's what we have to figure out. And it might not be. And if it's not, fuck it. Get rid of it. I don't want, just so anyone thinks, I don't want to do this shit. I'm not interested in it. But
sure, no,
it does have a net positive.
Fine.
Just to be clear, because a lot of people try to say that I'm trying to do what Dr. K does. I'm not interested in that. If it's worse in all ways and it's not doing any benefit at all and harming people actively, get rid of it. Always. Obviously. But if that's not the case, we have to look at it. Is there a way to improve it? Is there a way to get better protectionism? Maybe we can subsidize people that are doing this. Is there a way so that some of these risks that you're outlining here can be corrected for?
Chud, can you answer for somebody like Dr. K, who seems to have a prestigious career? He's got his own practice outside of, Twitch. He's got a bunch of different things going on outside of Twitch. How big are bits and subs? How big of a deal is that? Because it seems like he's making this sound like it's charity, right? He's doing a favor for everybody in the audience so that they can kind of get what this is about and hopefully go to therapy themselves.
I can answer really simply. If bits and subs aren't a big deal, why has he turned that all on?
Because if he wants to keep doing this, if he thinks he's doing potential good, he still needs to monetize it somewhere. The issue is with access in normal therapy, we swallow the risk for potential perversive incentives because we know that we need to allow some level of access so people that can have therapy, right? So we swallow that pill. Dr. K is swallowing the potential perverse incentive in his thing so that he can access more or less to reach thousands of people to improve well-being. And yes, some of that needs to be monetized fundamentally, because if you want to do this full time, you have to. The only difference here is the argument of extent. I would agree that there is a greater extent of risk with Dr. K because there's less institutional control and understanding around it, but we're still doing a certain swallowing of extent. And so we just have to do the cost benefit analysis now of saying, is there a trade-off here that we're willing to swallow this risk? Or are there certain parts of this risk, like in Dr. K's situation, that we can mitigate in some way? It's still a cost-benefit analysis, and it's not obvious that what he's doing is only bad and should just be avoided.
Yeah, okay, that was more about my question, is more so the extent, because we can see that he's able to make money outside of this, and it doesn't seem to be his main source of income. So I would assume that this is only a small thing to him to get those bits.
How do you know that?
Well, I think he's talked about the fact that bits and donations and subs actually go towards some sort of, some sort of program that he has where it's almost like donating to charity or some crap. So I don't know.
Wait, he's set up a non-profit, right? That he runs. Yeah. But I mean, I don't know if it's a charity. I think it's just a non-profit organization. I don't know if it's a charity as such.
I believe it covers, I think it covers costs for certain people. I could be wrong. I think that's what it does.
But I'm saying I don't know that this is actually something that goes straight into his pocket anyways. From what it sounds like, it doesn't sound like
even if it doesn't go straight into his pocket, if it is going towards his business concerns, that's benefiting him still.
But that's the same with that. Yes, but that's the same with therapists. Yes, but that's the same with all therapists. That's the same with everyone who does any private help. Oh,
sure, but this is about
is going towards your own business and yourself and people you pay, which comes back up to you.
But this is about how it incentivizes his content, though. That's kind of what I'm getting at, is whether or not he's actually doing something that could help the person that's on, or if he's harming them.
Do you think he wants to get more bits and subs or less bits and subs?
More, because in his view, he would say, I can help more people if I have more.
So he is going to take action to maximize the amount of subs and bits he's getting, correct?
He might, and if he goes in unethical levels, like goading people to
review
things that they shouldn't, not necessarily. If he's the worst possible actor, he will. But just to be honest, Chud, you could come online, and if you wanted to maximize your bits and everything, you could be a lying, backstabbing piece of shit. Everyone can be a bad actor to maximize their money. That's the problem in large part with like elements of capitalism money, is that like we know this. We know from streaming, most people backstab, they drama farm, they make friends with you to just backstab you labor with the full goal of getting more views and more sub counts. Like this happens everywhere. So basically we have to ask, are we assuming that Dr. K is the worst possible actor or the best possible actor? And I'm saying it's probably somewhere in between.
Okay. Because listen, I'm looking at this from a streamer's perspective, okay? Dr. K is a streamer. Mm-hmm. If I've had a couple of days and it's a bit quiet, there hasn't been much going on, I'm kind of on the dregs of YouTube videos or some shitty drama that no one gives a shit about, right? I'm going into stream number 4, number 5, and I'm like, I need something juicy. I need something big. And then what do you know? Xander Hall's girlfriend has been doing meth. Fucking let's go. Big stream, you know, big day, etc., right? So, you know, I don't think it's a case that I'm malicious. I don't want Xander Hall to come to any fucking harm, right? But I will capitalize and take advantage of the opportunity that's put in front of me. Now, if I'm a doctor and I'm looking at, you know, mental health, I could easily see a way that conceptualizes as, you know, it's been a quiet couple of days, subs are down, viewership is down. Oh, this person wants to speak to me and they're a big streamer. Oh, they're riddled with mental health problems, you know? And then you, when you're speaking to them, you're not just focused on the outcomes for them. It's also, you know, what's my viewership looking like? Am I getting enough subs, bits and donors coming through? You know, what action can I take to make this more engaging so that more viewers come in and so that people donate and spend more? You know, I think this is, you know, to me, a very obvious way of how someone's mind might work in that situation, just based on my own experience as a streamer. So that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And this is why I'm saying, as a professional, this is why I actually want professionals doing this more, is I would hope that they wouldn't do the things, even if it would bump up their viewership, that would put the person that they're talking to at high levels of risk, even if it would be good at viewership. Now, if Dr. K is consistently always doing that and always trying to expose people and always trying to drive the narrative to like the spiciest things possible, again, I think we have an ethical problem there. I would find that intolerable. I just don't have evidence that he's always doing that. Now, if it's changed and now like most of the time when he talks to people, that's what he's going for, that's really bad. I don't like that. But this is where I'm hoping actually as a professional, right? This is what I talked about with somebody else. If we've got 2 people interviewing homeless people for a YouTube channel, right? We've got a random layperson and a social worker. I'm fine with both, but I would hope that the social worker, and I'd feel more comfortable with it, because I would hope that they would basically be able to foresee certain risks that they're giving to that homeless individual. They know which questions to ask and which to not. They're going to maybe feel when a person's going into a territory that's probably like going to put them at risk, and they would do what they can to like safeguard that person based on their professional expertise. I would hope that they would do that. But they might not. And if they're not doing that, that's really bad. You should throw the book at them or spit them to the ethics board. That's totally fine. But I don't want to assume that just because they're a social worker talking to homeless people, that they're trying to cultivate stuff.
Okay. When Dr. K was talking to that woman and asking probing questions when she was clearly uncomfortable about her Yvonne, yeah. Mm-hmm. What do you think the reason for him doing that was? What was his thought process?
Sure. If you want me to speculate on his thought process, there was probably a bit of like, there might have been a goal of like trying to get her to reveal something. He maybe like could tell that she was a passive person, and at like some level of therapeutic level, he's like, it's going to be really important for you to like, he kept saying like, you're such a passive person. It would be really good for you to just like speak your truth, girl. Right. And maybe he just wasn't thinking about the fact that it was public. Or maybe there's a mixture of both, where he's like, it would be really good for you to do this, and it would be good for my viewership. It's possible that we're both going on. Regardless, I don't actually care what his speculation was. I think it was inappropriate. I don't actually care what his thought process was behind it. I think it was inappropriate, and I'd rather judge him on what we actually observe and see than speculate purely and like judge him on my speculations about why he's doing something. With Yvonne, he was at an intolerable. That was inappropriate.
Sure. So, I mean, I guess with me, my interpretation would be he is looking at that and he is thinking, here's a juicy moment for the stream that people can, you know, get something out of. Now, I don't think that his you know, Yvonne's well-being and you know, status as a patient is at the forefront of his mind in that circumstance. You know, there's almost a level of excitement, you know, that he's probing with this, and it just feels to me like he is, you know, digging into this, not because of any concern for the patient, but because he can get a juicy moment for the stream, a clippable moment, as they say.
Right. Maybe.
And I guess that's just going to come down to our interpretation.
I would say it's more comes down to like behavioral analysis. Like you got to look to it. And ideally, if you talk to the research ethics board, they're going to actually ask him and like get a better understanding of a speculation. But for the most part, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. We might just end up looping. I seem to assume better of Dr. K because I think he's a decently good faith actor. Do I think he's fucked up? Yes. In the case of Yvonne, absolutely. In the case of the 4 after with Byron, absolutely. He also does other things wrong. I personally wouldn't choose to do what he does because of multiple reasons, but I'm not going to assume the worst case, but I am going to evaluate the explicit behavior that we can see and weigh in just on that. You have a less charitable interpretation of him, which is fine. I could be wrong. I could be naive for whatever reason. But I don't know if we're either going to move in either way, because I think it's fine that you have like more of a hesitation. Like you just said, like, this is just how I feel. And I mean, that's fine. Unfortunately, more or less, this is how I feel. Like I'm giving him some level of like benefit of the doubt, which maybe I shouldn't do. Maybe if I start streaming and 2 years later, maybe I won't give any streamer the benefit of the doubt. Like maybe I'm naive, but I think like I don't know if we're going to reconcile this, because it's just like I'm just giving him the benefit of the doubt. That doesn't make me better. That's just like that's what's informing my position, and yours is being informed. I'm like, I'm a streamer. I know this shit works. I think there's some slimy shit going on, which is fair. Those are fine.
And just to be clear, I'm not even necessarily saying it's a slimy. I'm very much a believer. If you show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. I think that it's not a case that he's there, deviously thinking like, oh yes, I'm going to get her to talk about rape. Great. It's almost subconscious of getting that clippable moment. So I don't think he's like slimy. I just think that incentive can override, any possible sense of like standards or ethics or something like that, possibly. Yeah.
But you are saying that we should kind of assume the worst in that case, that we should assume that is the intent, or not even, you don't even care about the intent, you care about the incentive and just assume the worst from there. Because I agree with the way that she described it.
Yeah. I mean, you're packing a lot in to say, assume the worst. I think that, you've got to be pretty generous to come to the position, I think, that him pushing Yvonne on stream was out of concern for her and her well-being. I think that's a very generous interpretation.
I don't care though. It was still inappropriate. It was still wrong.
Because you're going back to
I don't care what the reasoning was.
Okay.
I'm just saying, like, because what we're doing is like, he's like, well, what about Yvonne? I'm like, yeah, that was wrong. It's incorrect. And you're like, well, what about the intent? I'm like, I don't care. I don't care what your intent was. Right?
I understand.
Whether you punch, like whether you assault somebody because of the best intentions or the like worst intentions, if you just go up to somebody randomly and deck them in the face, right? Like,
right.
I'm going to still probably say like, that's probably not wrong. Now there might be complicating factors. The difference is you and I have a difference of agreement of view. I don't think the incentive overrides. I don't think that overall. Sometimes it maybe does, but overall, I don't think his incentive is overriding his decisions. I do like to think that basically he's working with some level of good faith and like good intentions. But yeah.
The reason we loop back around to Yvonne is because for me, I feel like it's a good example of something to point to where there is, as you say yourself, there's a question over like, well, you say yourself it's inappropriate. So why is he acting in an inappropriate manner?
Well, just because there's incent there doesn't mean that there's intent. Like you're basically saying because there's incentive, there's intent. But it's like if I go into Walmart, there's every incentive to steal. But most people don't go into Walmart and steal because there's different intents.
But what I'm saying is he has acted in an inappropriate manner there. And I just find it very difficult to even with your explanation, to come to the conclusion that the reason he's acted inappropriately is for the betterment or to the central focus of Yvonne. Right?
And he's human. He fucked up. He might have had the worst intentions in that day, but that doesn't mean that he has the worst intentions every day. Like therapists act in all manner. Therapists fuck up all the time, by the way. It's just we don't usually hear about it because most of them are minor enough that they're correctable, right? I have fucked up as a therapist. I've had to go back to clients and be like, hey, I apologize and I'd like to correct it. It's actually something in like training, you learn you're going to fuck up. How do you properly address it with a client to like fix that relationship when you do fuck up, and then try to fuck up as little as possible, obviously, right? The difference is Dr. K's was public, so you could see it all. And that's probably good because now you can report him to the ethics board. And if he did something wrong with Yvonne, he should be criticized and like reprimanded by his body if he had, whether he had good intentions or bad intentions. Regardless of what he did something incorrect there. And you're right, there doesn't seem like a good reason why somebody would do that. And like the best, even if it was the best of faith, it doesn't change the fact that he was inappropriate. So it's like, even if you were trying to do no harm, you need to remember that this is public. And even if it would be like a great girl boss moment for her to say their name, the damages that could come with it in a legal way are not worth it for her, and you should never be pushing her publicly. That is inappropriate to do. And that reprimand should come to him. That is fair, regardless of whether his intention was, I was trying to get money. Now, if his goal was, I was just trying to get money, the ethics board should come down even harder with a much firmer reprimand, right? Because that intention is really bad. But I can't say what his intention is. All I can say is his behavior with Yvonne was inappropriate, but I've seen his behavior with other people and it's been less inappropriate. So I don't know what to say overall.
Okay.
Y'all want to wrap it up there?
Well, yeah, I think we've had a pretty good conversation. I've enjoyed it.
I apologize if I wasn't. You guys are a little intense. There are some times where like each one of you has these like misunderstandings, but you guys end up like diverting into a new conversation off of those misunderstandings to where the misunderstandings don't even end up mattering. Fairly
this
quickly.
Is why like Chud is still like one of my favorite people, and I'm not trying to like blow smoke up your ass, by the way. Like I actually feel, just to be clear, I just feel very happy with how the conversation went for the most part. Like the reason why I really like Chud in this sphere is him and I can wrestle, get spicy with each other and talk about stuff. But I fundamentally, especially if you talk to him like offline and stuff, I think he actually cares about his ethics and tries to live by them. I think he's been backstabbed, probably not just because I'm not just saying you're only ethical because you've been backstabbed, but like, I think he's been experienced enough in this field to be like very careful. He doesn't trust people quickly, which is super fucking fair. But I also don't think that he would ever backstab me. Would he throw me under the bus if he thought I was a dumb idiot moron? Yes, but that's totally different in my view. I don't think he'd ever do something like slimy and sinister. And whenever he's like disagreeing with me on these topics, I don't think he's trying to say like you're a bad human overall. And I don't think he's like trying to communicate that with his chat. So
do you get that from other people?
Yeah. Oh yes, absolutely.
Who's the worst? Who's the worst?
Who's the right now? Not Eli Monty is like one of the worst. He's not a very big streamer, and I haven't engaged with Emil Cemetery, but I suspect that they're similarly like very backstabby, kind of lie to your face and then turn around and use it against you. Kind of, and it's just like I would never expect that if I talked to Chud that he would say something and ask me a question in good faith, knowing he was lying so that he could get me to respond in a way in DM so he could turn around and use it against me. I don't know if I would trust those two to not do that to me.
Yeah, I mean, my job is
madam,
like...
I've had a very good conversation.
Good.
President is actually in my chat. He's very positive, actually. Yeah, he's saying you're doing a great job. So
I'm sure he's not.
Don't look,
yeah, I'm sure he's not. You know, I have some concerns sometimes about the friends you keep, but you know, that's okay, Chud. It's your life, your choices. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, I get on with the most hated people in the space.
That's
you
true.
know, but also I don't really shit on Destiny, so it's kind of like, you know,
yeah.
I don't make it easy for myself.
So should I try to become one of the also most hated people in the space, or are we distant enough that you don't have to be good friends with me and I can still be a not fully hated person in this space?
Well, I think as long as I sometimes watch your conversations, like say with Mr. Girl, and I give like 10% misogyny and throw in that you're a demon from time to time, normally that's okay. So
right, that's fair.
Yeah, I think you have to become a lolcow to become the most hated.
Yeah. Are we good? How are you feeling about the conversation? Feeling good? Are we okay?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Listen, I know we got some disagreements. I've had a good time hashing it out. Yeah, no hard feelings, and it's been great to talk to you. It's been a good time.
I know. Are we ever going to have a positive, like a pleasant conversation? It's surprising to me how much we get along. Actually, like I'd say, like you're definitely one of the people I like enjoy talking to the most. But I don't know if we've ever had just like a nice, light, positive conversation.
Well, what we need to do, I've watched you on panels, and I've you know agreed like with your takes, like with Destiny got banned, right? And I thought, you've done well, and I would have agreed with you. So I think maybe a panel situation could be good. I mean, listen, if you want us to have a friendly chat, we can do that anytime.
I don't know what we talk about, though. Feels like wrestling is like our love language.
Yeah, it's true. What about, addiction? Is that too broad?
No, I mean, I've got lots to talk about addiction, so I can go in any direction with that.
Okay. Sounds good. Oh, I tell you what would be good. We could have like a sort of chat initially, and then we could bring people on to talk to you if you'd feel comfortable with that.
Like a 2-hour hate?
Well, you're not as I don't
know. Your chat scares me. Like I don't look at it a lot, but there is some like your chat was talking about my fucking bra straps. Which, first of all, this is not a bra. Second of all, who cares that I have bra straps? Of course I have bra straps. I have fucking tits. Why wouldn't I have bra straps?
There was a bit
your
of
chat's a little
misogyny,
weird. Yeah, they're a little aggressive with their misogyny sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is it's I like to think that Twitch chat would be better. I think a YouTube, attracts more of the crazies. But hey, look,
yeah,
I'm not going to do too much apologetics. Yeah, listen, misogyny is not on, guys. Let's, bra straps. Come on, we're better than that.
True.
There you go.
And whatever madam energy is coming out of it. Maybe I'll spend an entire stream just covering what people's chats say about me while I talk to them, and then I'll make a tier list of people's chats.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Most sexist. Ask for sexism.
The other day when you got busy, his chat was very nice to me. I was saying some things that normally they all think is like really egregious, but they all came on and had nice disagreements with me.
Like usually when I jump in his chat as a typer, they're pretty warm towards me.
Yeah, but I'm also a man, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, well, the first time we spoke, obviously, there's a lot of people really shitting on you, but true, yes. Tom, but, I think the abortion thing, you had kind of reasonable positions.
Yeah, and that's the issue is that Chud and I only like wrestle with ideas. So I think a lot of his chat like sees me as like the enemy woman, right? We're like, oh, she's so mean and says lots of bad things, and for whatever reason always thinks I'm condescending. Even if I'm like as calm as fucking possible, somebody's still going to talk about how I'm condescending or passive aggressive, and I'm like, motherfuckers, I'm aggressive, okay? Like a lot of the time, I am passive aggressive sometimes. But usually I'm just aggressive. But yeah, they're usually pretty warm towards me. I'm just like the red-faced demon woman, and that's fine.
I think
I'm actually pretty kind, though. Just so everyone knows.
I definitely have people from like Mr. Girl's community that watch me. And listen, I love them deeply. But of course, you've got no love lost between you and Mr. Girl.
I think we're actually... Did you see our last conversation?
I didn't know. Was it good?
You should watch it. It was really good. It was a really good conversation. I would say, like, yeah, I just have a very like warm, soft spot in my heart for Max. I don't have any like strong. I don't agree with his behavior a lot of the time, but yeah, I think he's a. I guess.
Okay, actually, there's a really important question I actually need to ask.
Okay.
Do you believe that Max believes that what Dr. K did was worse than rape?
Yes, I believe that. Yes, I believe that he thinks it's worse than rape. Absolutely, I believe that he feels that way entirely.
Okay, that's good.
We actually talked about that. Him and I talked exactly about that, and I said, like, I understand why you're asking that so much. I won't spoil it, but I basically tell him like, this is what I think's going on, and it seemed to really resonate with him. So
I'll check it out. It sounds good.
We're not besties, but it's. I think he said a tentative alliance. What he called it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
We're gonna talk about pedophiles in the future.
I had a video a while ago where I kind of made fun of the two of you in your first conversation because you had like a full minute-long silence of both of you just sitting there.
There's a 5-minute-long silence in this one.
Yes, there was a 5-minute-long silence in this one. I can't put that into a YouTube short. It's way too long. I gotta speed it up this time.
That's what I really like about Max, though. Like, a lot of people think that he's like doing this power struggle with the silences. Maybe sometimes he is, but usually he's thinking. Like, he's usually like sitting there and like, even though like Max gets like shit on a lot, he actually really thinks about what people say, especially when they criticize him. Like, he genuinely thinks about it. Like, he genuinely thinks about what they're saying and doesn't just immediately like defend himself for the most part. Which is really, yeah, I just really appreciate that.
I did an interview with him for my documentary, and he does the same thing where like I ask a question and he sits there for a while and like processes it and thinks about it, where sometimes he'll start and then stop and be like, okay, hold on, and think about it for a moment and then start again. And like, yeah, I think I think that experience showed that like, yeah, it's not like this like, you know, persona that he's putting on. He actually is sitting and thinking about his responses, and I really appreciate that, because I can't do that. I'm very like aggressive at like getting into conversations. It's just like going. So it's something that I look at and think, dang, maybe I should try practicing that sometime.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, I feel like that's it, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, I think so.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks to both of you. It's been a pleasure.
Are we we're not doing anything with Steven?
No, he's doing something. Lauren Southern's released a manifesto, so I think he's going over that.
Okay.
Unfortunately. Sorry, mate.
It's all good. I'll message him and we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Lauren Southern made a manifesto now?
Yeah,
Manifestos
I don't know what it's about. Yeah, they are in. I don't know what's going on with it, but I'm sure it's going to be some drama, so that's good.
Manifestos are always good content, so.
Indeed.
All right. Chud, do you want me to hit you up for talking about, I think you said addiction?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Okay. I'll DM you and we'll book a time.
Okay. Sounds great. Okay. Catch you later.
Later.
Awesome.